Chapter 81. Sorry, I already know how. Will Wizard Gorsa allow you into the Wizard Tower? The butler asked with some concern. Our Bloodthorn family just lost our only heir. Are we not even allowed to pay a visit? Ralph's expression darkened at the mention of Gorsa. Seed's father would have sold the book to anyone, but he had to sell it to the Wizard Tower. Gorsa has been a second rank for a long time. His foundation is far beyond mine. But blaming the dead now was pointless. In any case, we need to first find out who has the diary. Anyone who doesn't know the method can't read its contents, even if they're holding it for now. Ralph narrowed his eyes. I've cut all my ties now. My own grandson died at the hands of the diary's current owner. The bond of death between me and the diary is strong enough. Once I retrieve it, I'll definitely be able to read what's written inside. Ralph's expression twisted into something between a smile and a grimace. Once I successfully decode the diary, I'll be able to become a fourth rank, a great wizard just like my ancestors. The butler kept his head lowered in silence. Originally, his master had planned to wait until young Seed acquired the diary. Then, when the boy couldn't use it and returned to the estate to look up ancient texts, the butler would step in. But now the plan had changed. The young master was dead, and the diary had fallen into someone else's hands. The master would have to act personally. The butler didn't know what use the diary held, but he knew that his master had spent most of his life chasing after it, and had killed every blood relative in the process. It was his master's life's pursuit, so the butler would support him without question. Today's basic knowledge of all things class had gathered a crowd of apprentices again. Even those who'd skipped out to slack off or study other subjects had shown up. When Saul appeared once more in the public classroom, many people, including seasoned first-rank apprentices, were secretly observing him. If in the past his future had looked grim after a second-rank senior openly threatened him, now things were different. After placing first in the recent test and receiving a personal invitation from Lockeye, president of the Mutual Aid Association, people were forced to reevaluate Saul. Saul ignored the burning stares and walked into the classroom expressionlessly. He immediately spotted Kelly sitting in the back row and headed her way with his bag in hand. Kelly was seated at the outermost spot of the second-to-last row. Upon seeing Saul, she scooted one seat inward. "How many zero-tier spells do you know now?" she whispered before he even sat down. "More than you, that's for sure," Saul replied bluntly as he took his seat. Kelly felt like she'd taken 10,000 points of damage, but she had no choice but to believe it. After all, the reason she'd managed to learn 3 zero-tier spells was thanks to Saul's coordinate method. The more she thought about it, the more amazing that method seemed. Had she paid him too little? But she wasn't planning to pay more. The first class, basic knowledge of all things, passed quickly. Saul spent it frantically cramming common knowledge. The second period was a meditation class. Unexpectedly, Monica, who had only shown up for the very first lesson and hadn't been seen since, returned to teach today. As usual, she held the leash of the lizard responsible for scraping away her charred, dead skin. Dressed in a silk gown that accentuated her figure, she walked to the center of the classroom. Many apprentices quickly moved from the corners of the room toward the center. It was rare to have a chance at one-on-one instruction from Monica. She let go of the leash, allowing her little lizard to roam freely, and stood in the center with one hand resting casually on her hip, emphasizing her slim waist. "It's been 3 months now. I assume those of you who have put even a little effort into meditation have already made decent progress in increasing your magic, yes?" Monica swept her gaze across the room. Everyone was seated on cushions, looking up at her. "So then, has anyone reached a magic value above 20 joules?" Only Kelly raised her hand without changing expression. "Oh, not bad," Monica nodded at her. "What about 15 joules?" A few more hands went up around the room. Saul, sitting quietly next to Kelly, had only increased his magic by 1 jewel since the test. He now had 14. After waiting a moment longer and seeing no more hands, Monica sighed. Now that you've experienced your first test, you should have some idea of the kind of life you're in for. No one in the Wizard Tower will push you to learn, but if you fall behind, you'll pay the price. Saul noticed the mood growing heavier among the students. Even Kelly bit her lip in unease. Did something happen after Kaz took him away yesterday? Although Anne's tested you by counting the number of spells you'd mastered, which may have seemed harsh, only apprentices who have grasped a certain amount of magic are useful to the Wizard Tower. Monica stepped forward and began strolling slowly through the classroom. Each apprentice she passed felt a massive pressure, as if a storm were about to strike. I want you all to understand something. The Wizard Tower is not a wizard academy. Here, knowledge comes at a price. If you can't handle any of the work assigned by the tower, if you make no contribution, then in the end, you'll repay the tower's nurture with your own body as nourishment. Hearing this, Saul had a realization. Gorsa's Wizard Tower isn't an academy, it's a company. These periodic tests aren't school exams, they're more like performance reviews. Just then, Monica happened to stop beside Saul and Kelly. She suddenly pointed to Kelly. Since your magic is the highest, let me see how you meditate. Following her instructions, Kelly opened her meditation book, set out her crystal orb, closed her eyes, and settled into a calm expression. Even under Monica's watchful eye, she quickly entered a deep meditative state. After observing for a while, Monica nodded and told her to stop. What's your name? Kelly, instructor Monica. Kelly's meditation is very standard. She's also good at blocking out external distractions and entering a fully immersive state quickly. After offering a few words of praise, Monica turned her head naturally towards Saul. Well then, Saul, let me see your meditation too, she said, calling his name with precision. Yes, Saul had a good impression of Monica, since she had once hinted at the element he was naturally attuned to. He began meditating skillfully, entering a deep state no slower than Kelly. But the next second, Monica suddenly took his meditation book. Startled out of his concentration, Saul looked up at her in confusion. Monica held the book between 2 fingers, lightly waving it in the air with a mischievous smile. Using a crystal orb and meditation book is the most basic form of full immersion, but sometimes you'll need to meditate under emergency conditions without the luxury of tools. In such cases, you'll have to rely solely on your mental strength to enter a semi-immersive state. Monica smiled down at Saul. Saul, try meditating without the book or the orb. Ugh. Under Monica's obviously playful gaze, Saul gave a quick demonstration of a 1-second semi-immersion. The speed and efficiency of it stunned Monica, who had been fully expecting a flustered mess. Her lips twitched. When Saul emerged from the brief meditative state, Monica no longer smiled. She looked at him with a complicated expression. Instructor Monica. Without answering, she turned and walked back to the center of the classroom. 2 arcs of lightning suddenly exploded from her body, charring her arm and left cheek. Yet her clothing remained untouched, likely due to some special artifact. All right, Monica finally spoke again, having calmed down. You see, it's very simple, just do it like Saul did. Now everyone try meditating. All the apprentices. Kelly leaned over and whispered quickly to Saul, she's mad. Saul also felt like instructor Monica was a bit upset. But why? Was it because he learned on his own? Chapter 82, Knowledge a Monster. Fortunately, Monica eventually gave everyone a detailed explanation of how to perform semi-immersive meditation. Even Saul, who had taught himself semi-immersive meditation, gained quite a bit of insight from it. Previously, whenever he entered a semi-immersive state, it was always to observe contamination and abnormalities. But according to Monica's explanation, semi-immersive meditation was actually a temporary technique for stabilizing the mental body and quickly replenishing magic. When Saul had encountered danger in Mentor Kaz's lab, he'd used semi-immersive meditation to stabilize his mental body. But afterward, he'd used it almost exclusively to detect mutated materials, so much so that he had nearly forgotten its original purpose. Saul's magic had increased significantly over the past 3 months. Now, even fully immersive meditation couldn't quickly restore his entire magic reserve, let alone semi-immersive meditation. However, the advantage of semi-immersive meditation was its quick startup. In a short time, it could actually restore more magic than full immersion. Still, this kind of unaided meditation, without any auxiliary tools, wasn't easy to master. It required the apprentice to be highly familiar with their meditation diagram and skilled in manipulating their mental power. If every time they meditated, they simply followed the lines on the diagram, then the moment they put the book down, they would fall into the memory maze of, "I think that's how it went," or maybe not. Once most of the new apprentices started attempting semi-immersive meditation, Monica began wandering aimlessly through the classroom. Occasionally, some older apprentices would ask questions. Some she answered, and some she only smiled at without a word. When Monica passed by, Saul raised his hand and asked a question too. "Instructor Monica, are the meditation diagrams different for first-rank and second-rank apprentices? Or do we have to learn a new diagram at each stage?" Second-rank apprentices have usually already learned a first-tier spell. Their mental bodies are strong enough to withstand more dangerous diagrams, so yes, they can switch, Monica replied with her usual smile as she turned to Saul. "But once you reach third rank, you won't need a meditation diagram anymore." "Won't need it," Saul was startled but quickly caught on. "Because of the locator." Monica raised an eyebrow. "Seems like you really have learned a lot of advanced knowledge. That's good, but also risky." She extended a finger and gently tapped Saul's forehead. Crack! A small arc of lightning flashed. Startled, Saul instinctively jumped back, but a sharp sting still hit his forehead. Learning too much knowledge beyond your current ability means you must be ready to bear the risks that come with it. With that, Monica clasped her hands behind her back and continued walking, leaving Saul alone, rubbing his forehead in contemplation. Nearly every senior student and mentor had mentioned that in the pursuit of knowledge, a sorcerer would encounter unknown dangers. At first, Saul thought it simply meant that the mind, or rather, the mental body, could become dizzy and collapse from the complexity of the knowledge. But now it seemed more than that. It gave him the unsettling feeling that knowledge itself might be a kind of monster. Unfortunately, there was no one to answer that question. From the end of class, through lunch, and all the way to the second floor of the East Tower, Saul kept turning the idea over in his mind. Then, just before entering the morgue, he ran into Mentor Kaz again. "Mentor," Saul was a bit surprised. Kaz usually didn't show up this often. He had been seeing his mentor quite a lot lately. "As the top scorer in the test, you can choose a companion flower. I'll take you there." Kaz didn't wait for a reply before turning and walking away. Saul, confused, quickly followed. He remembered Senior Rocky had mentioned the companion flower reward. Because Lakai was the public leader of the Mutual Aid Society, Saul didn't want much to do with him and hadn't paid the reward much mind. He didn't expect Kaz himself to personally escort him to pick the flower. As he followed the mentor, Saul fished the basics knowledge of all things out of his bag and flipped to the botany section. Companion flower can establish a bloodline connection with a living being and dies after bearing fruit. Its fruit varies in type and effect, usually providing minor magic increases or mental stabilization. Just a few lines of description were enough to stir Saul's anticipation. Increasing magic might become Saul's lifelong pursuit. Soon, he noticed that he and Kaz had turned down a passageway he had never seen before. It seemed they had reached the 5th floor of the East Tower, a storage area not accessible to apprentices. After they passed the main warehouse door, they continued on and turned down another corridor. As they went farther, the path began to slope downward. They walked for quite a while. Saul hastily stuffed the book back into his bag, peering curiously ahead. The gray stone bricks gradually gathered dust, and the wall-mounted candles became sparser and older. One lamp stand was even broken, drooping at an angle against the wall. Such disrepair was unheard of in the tower. In Saul's mind, the tower was always tidy and orderly, maintained with great care. He started wondering where exactly the companion flower was kept. It was a plant, after all. Most would grow in soil. And arable land inside the tower was scarce. Could it be outside? His heart began to race, equal parts excited and anxious. Afraid he'd be disappointed in the end. But this time, life did not let him down. After descending for a while longer, Saul saw a large wooden door reinforced with metal, standing wide open. No candles were lit nearby, yet the place wasn't dark at all. A gentle, brilliant light shone in from beyond the door, a stark contrast to the pale candlelight inside. Kaz paused before the door and glanced back at Saul, who was craning his neck to see past him. "Calm down, don't act like some clueless monkey," he said. Saul immediately shrank back. But his eyes were still sparkling with excitement. "Mentor, are we going outside the tower? Don't make a fuss. Once you reach 2nd rank, there will be plenty of chances to go out. Right now, we keep you inside to stop the outside world from distracting you from your studies." Kaz glared at Saul. He always had a feeling this little apprentice might embarrass him someday. As they approached the gate, Saul recalled a terrifying scene. One he had seen in Mentor Rum's illusion. Scorched earth, bubbling mud, scattered corpses, and black tentacled horrors. Could that be what lay beneath the tower, a hellish realm? Kaz had already disappeared beyond the doorway. Saul took a deep breath and stepped through. Even if terrifying, it still called to him. But then, a gentle breeze brushed across his face, carrying the moist scent of grass. Beyond the gate was a flat expanse of land. No black sludge, just pale yellow soil. Beneath his feet lay a specially constructed path, branching out in all directions for easy travel. Above him was a clear blue sky. In the distance, green mountains and dense forests, no sudden shift into hellscape. Not far down the path was a garden enclosed by a simple wooden fence. A small wooden hut stood at its entrance, with someone vaguely visible inside. From outside the fence, Saul could see the garden's many flowers swaying in the wind. They seemed a bit messy, not deliberately arranged. Then came the sound of hoofbeats and wheels. Saul turned to see a 2-person carriage speeding down another path. That road approached the tower from a different direction. The carriage quickly disappeared behind the tower's high walls. "That's the vehicle entrance," Kaz explained casually, seeing Saul staring. Saul nodded and shifted his gaze around. The wizard's tower stood alone in a desolate field, with only the faint shadows of villages far in the distance. Perhaps the locals had been deliberately driven away. Though sparsely populated, the area wasn't as terrifying as the illusion, just a little lonely. Saul couldn't help but wonder, was that vision I saw back then, was Rum trying to scare me, or was it my own imagination? Chapter 83, Companion Flowers. The outside world didn't seem all that terrifying after all. Life outside the Wizard Tower wasn't too different from the ancient times of Saul's previous life. But the very next second, Mentor Kaz's words shattered Saul's illusion. Those sealed carriages are mostly used to transport materials. Materials. Most of them are corpses polluted by the outside world. After all, there are only so many people in the Wizard Tower. If we had to rely on the corpses produced here, you'd all be out of work. No wonder Saul didn't recognize the appearance of many of the corpses. Do the surrounding towns offer people up willingly? They don't have the strength for that. Most of the time, it's third-rank apprentices who actively go out to collect the polluted corpses. It's also a way of protecting the nearby territories. Otherwise, why do you think they're so willing to send their children here? Kaz smiled, a smile that was hard to tell if it was more proud or more mocking. The two walked toward the garden. As they neared, a small window in a wooden hut swung open, and a sallow-faced middle-aged man poked his head out. His features were plain, except for an unusually long, protruding nose, like Pinocchio. Probably modified as well. "Good afternoon, Master Kaz," the man greeted enthusiastically. Kaz nodded in response, then pointed at the man and said to Saul, "That's the gardener. Once you've chosen your companion flower, he'll teach you how to take care of it." Saul quickly nodded to the gardener, who replied with a bright smile full of yellowed teeth. They arrived at the garden gate just as a breeze passed by, and the smell of freshly baked bread wafted into Saul's nose. What lay before them was called a garden, but it looked more like a vegetable patch. The land was divided into plots, each lined with rows of flowers. The stems were slender, but the buds were quite large, with only 2 petals on each. Some flowers were in full bloom, others still budding. When the wind blew, it looked like rows of big-headed bobbies dancing. The scent of bread grew even stronger. Saul had already eaten, but he still felt hungry. "Mentor, are these all companion flowers?" Kaz lifted his chin. "They are. Companion flower is just a general term for this type of plant. They look different, but their growth process and properties are the same." The two walked between the ridges. Saul couldn't shake the feeling that the flowers were turning their heads in sync with their movements, though it was impossible to tell front from back on a flower. These flowers thrive on rot and decay, so regular soil won't work. After you pick one, go find the gardener to have it transplanted into a pot, and he'll give you a pack of fertilizer. Fertilizer? Saul's steps faltered. Was it the same kind of fertilizer he had almost become? Companion flowers bear fruit roughly once every 6 months, 1 fruit per plant. The fruits come in various types and their probabilities differ. There's currently no way to cultivate them for specific outcomes. Blue ones increase magic power, red ones enhance physique. Saul quickly pulled out a notepad and began jotting everything down. Kaz glanced at him and shook his head. "You should have been writing this down a long time ago. Green ones are detoxifying, purple ones are poisonous. If you get a white one, be sure to hand it into the tower." Saul paused mid-writing, waiting a moment, but Kaz said no more. "Mentor, is there something wrong with the white fruit?" "Not exactly. White fruit stabilizes the mental body, which the tower is short on. If you manage to grow one, you can exchange it for 20 credits, no problem." 20 credits, that's half a year's pay. So valuable. Saul looked at the flowers again, now seeing them as a mountain of gold. Flowers that have already bloomed are hard to transplant. Just pick a budding one. "Yes, Mentor." Saul put away his notes and moved closer to the flower beds. There were over 100 flowers in the field, most in bloom, with only a few still in bud form. With credits on the line, Saul didn't rush his decision. He tried to observe and guess which one might bear a white fruit. At the very least, a blue one would do. But the flowers looked entirely random, different colors, different shapes, some like roses, others like tulips. None had fruit on them. The ones that bore fruit were probably already harvested. As Saul examined the flowers closely, Kaz's voice sounded behind him again, soft and cold. Rum wants you under his name, doesn't he? Saul immediately stopped and turned around. After a brief hesitation, he admitted honestly, yes. Kaz nodded, showing no sign of anger. I figured. You had another reason for choosing me as your mentor, didn't you? The real reason Saul had picked Kaz was because of Kanksha's influence. That potion she gave him had temporarily heightened his sensitivity to dark elemental particles, so much so that dark surpassed light, becoming his strongest elemental attribute. That led Saul, unknowingly, to choose Kaz over Rum. And do you regret it now? Kaz asked. No, I don't, Saul replied without hesitation. He wasn't just flattering his mentor, he truly felt no regret. If not for the opportunity Kanksha gave him, he wouldn't even qualify as an apprentice. Instead of resenting her manipulation, he saw it as the price of entry into the apprenticeship. A perspective that aligned perfectly with Senior Byron's values. Kaz gave a crooked smile, though it carried a hint of coldness. Right, now that you've undergone body modification and are leaning toward dark affinity, there's no going back. Suddenly, the sunlight felt much less warm on Saul's skin. He quickly added, I truly don't regret it, mentor. If I hadn't been working in the morgue, I'd never have completed the modification. Oops, that was close. He nearly spilled about using morgue's materials. Saul quickly shifted gears. Besides, I really enjoy working in the morgue. It's perfect for focused study and research. Whether Kaz picked up on Saul's morgue's materials or not was unclear, but his expression definitely improved. Sigh, mentor Kaz stood hunched, hands behind his back, and let out a soft sigh. If only everyone could learn to be content like you. Everyone else? Who? Who wasn't content? Ever since he'd learned the Tower Master's true identity, Saul suspected that even his job in the morgue had been arranged. The Tower Master had instructed him to study corpses and souls. How could he possibly disobey? And Saul wasn't lying. The work really did suit him. He just hadn't expected Mentor Kaz to sigh like that. It left Saul with a vague sense of unease. Who was so discontent that it could make Kaz sound so weary. Kaz didn't elaborate. He simply dropped the topic, leaving Saul full of questions. With your current abilities, you're fine working in the morgue. As long as you turn in the materials on time, I'll pass your tests. Wait, every month's test is going to be that simple. Thank you, mentor, I'll get it done. Saul had been worrying that for the second test, the mentors would demand he master more spells. He already had a lot to learn, and spell study had taken a backseat. He recalled that Senior Mark's test had also been task-based, organizing a lab or something similar. That made Saul more certain of what he'd already suspected. The Wizard Tower wasn't a school, it was a workplace. The apprentices' initial period of rapid learning was just onboarding. If a trainee couldn't handle any job after that, they'd be let go. The tower was a ruthless employer, and even fired employees had to serve as nourishment, giving their all to the very end. In that case, those two new apprentices who'd left the classroom first during the initial test, without even learning a single compound rune, they were probably in serious danger. Now that he thought about it, Saul hadn't seen them in class today. Could it be they'd already been terminated? Thank you, mentor. I'll keep doing my best. Saul gave another earnest promise. Kaz turned to leave. Take your time choosing. Once you're done, go find the gardener. Be back before sunset. Chapter 84, Underground. Kaz returned to the corridor once more. His slightly hunched back looked all the more small and fragile against the towering backdrop of the massive Wizard Tower. Saul looked up. The dark gray Wizard Tower loomed before him. The lower half of the tower's body had only solid walls, no windows. Saul couldn't tell how many floors there were, but he could tell the tower was no shorter than a modern skyscraper. Majestic and awe-inspiring, solemn and dignified. The marks of time added a heavy air of mystery and history to it. But for apprentices who weren't allowed to freely leave, this place felt more like a prison. Watching Mentor Kaz walk away, Saul quickly pushed aside the melancholy. He rubbed his hands together, practically drooling, as he leaned toward those lovely, credit-worthy companion flowers. Even if he didn't find one that could bear a white fruit, the blue or red ones were still useful. Saul wasn't picky. He walked along the edge of the field, searching for a flower bud that clicked with him. Soon, Saul spotted a particularly fine-looking one. Its stem was upright, the bud plump, it looked full of life. What's more, as he approached, the flower visibly moved, leaning its head toward him. Saul decided immediately, this one was it. He memorized the flower's location and appearance, then turned back toward the wooden hut. As he walked, he felt a strange sensation at his ankle, as if something were brushing against him. He looked down and saw a thin black tendril stretching out from the ground, as fine as a blade of grass. It was smooth and soft, hard to tell if it was a plant or an animal. But the more Saul looked at it, the more familiar it seemed. Then it hit him. Wasn't this the same black tendril he saw in the swampy pit in Mentor Rum's room? It was much smaller now, but the appearance was nearly identical. So the tendril was real after all. Then what about that black swamp? Was that real too? Was this peaceful, beautiful garden really sitting on solid ground? Recalling the sight of a corpse being dragged underground by that tendril, Saul felt his scalp tingle. That strange, brushing sensation now felt like a fuzzy worm crawling into his pant leg. He quickly lifted his foot and bolted, sprinting toward the wooden hut at the garden's entrance to call the gardener for help. Through the window, Saul saw the gardener sitting inside, back turned to him. Their arms were stiff, strangely rigid. "Gar," Saul tried to call out, feeling something wrap around his leg again. But before he could finish the word, a thick black tendril, as wide as a thigh, shot out in front of him and wrapped around his left arm, yanking him violently into the earth. The ground, which moments ago had seemed solid and dry, collapsed like mud. Loose soil and pebbles rushed at Saul. No matter how he struggled, he couldn't stop himself from falling. At last he gave up resisting, shut his eyes tight, and opened his senses. He began chanting the scorching breath spell, ready to smack whatever came near with a blast. Then the resistance vanished. Saul, covered head to toe in mud, landed with a loud splat in a pit of sludge. The black tendril wrapped around his arm vanished as well. But no expected attack followed. Saul pushed himself up from the muck and used his muddy hands to wipe his muddy face. PFFFT. Since he had opened his mouth to chant the spell, a good amount of disgusting mud had gotten inside. Blinking open his eyes, he saw nothing but pitch darkness, couldn't see his own hand in front of his face. The whole overhead seemed blocked by something, no sunlight shining through. Feeling his way in the dark, Saul stood. He didn't bump into anything. The ground beneath him was soggy and uneven, and he could hear something squirming underneath. A slimy thing, slick with mud, slid over his ankle, sending Saul reeling backward in shock. He nearly fell into the sludge again. In the dark, every sound and touch felt amplified. The unknown made his skin crawl. Saul forced himself to calm down and used his most familiar tool, meditation, to survey his surroundings. But to his surprise, the semi-immersive meditation, which always helped him detect danger, revealed nothing. No spirits, no anomalies. Clean, unnervingly clean. Just then, something shifted underfoot again. With a jolt, Saul scrambled back. As he swung a hand behind him, it hit something hard, stone. It felt like a raised platform above the mud. The surface was damp, but better than standing in the muck. Bracing himself with both hands, Saul climbed onto the platform to escape the tendrils. As they change, as they change, as they change, as they change. The moment he stood atop the platform, lanterns lit up at its four corners, casting light across the underground space. The ceiling above was at least 3 meters high. He was lucky to have landed in the mud and not hit solid ground, or those black tendrils on his fall. The soil above was somehow held in place. Aside from a bit of crumbling dirt and gravel, nothing else had fallen through with him. In the glow of the lanterns, he could now see a spacious area. Apart from the platform he stood on, the rest was filled with gray-black sludge. Black, writhing tendrils, or were they vines, moved through the muck. Other than the absence of corpses, the scene looked just like what he'd seen in Mentor Rum's room. The black tendrils didn't seem to harm living beings. They'd only brushed his limbs, not attacked. Still, why had they dragged him down here? The mud gone all the way down my collar. Gross. I have to learn cleanse as my next spell. Saul took off his outer robe, carefully avoiding the worst of the muck, and used a cleaner patch to wipe his face. Actually, maybe light should be the priority. Without it, I'm as good as blind in places like this. The familiar lanterns eased Saul's fear of the underground space. Their presence meant this place was still part of the Wizard Tower, but the dust and moss on the platform suggested it hadn't been used in a long time. Turning back, Saul finally noticed the platform's layout. It was a square, about 5 meters to a side, with 2 workbenches at its center. Shattered glassware lay scattered across them. He walked over and saw a sunken groove between the tables, just large enough to fit an average adult down. Someone must have done experiments here, but for some reason the place was abandoned. His muddy footprints marred the dark moss covering the platform. He circled the edge of the platform. Beyond was more sludge, stretching past the range of the lantern light. It looked like dirt in the distance, but no clear path out was visible. Doesn't feel safe to wander in that direction. Saul looked up. Maybe I should try climbing out instead. He tried lifting one of the workbenches. It was heavy, but manageable. Standing on it, he couldn't quite reach the ceiling. But if he stacked both tables, he might be able to grab onto the soil overhead. Hopefully, he could find a foothold or a way to call for help. Though the gardener might come looking if Saul was gone too long, he wasn't the type to sit around and wait to be rescued. He grabbed one end of the table and began dragging it into place. Scream! A sharp screech rang out as the legs scraped across the stone platform, leaving black marks. The noise seemed to stir the surrounding sludge. It began to bubble. Saul froze and watched carefully. Though the tendrils hadn't harmed him yet, he had no confidence in fighting something so massive and mysterious. Black tendrils rose from the sludge, twisting and reaching toward the platform, but it seemed they were restricted somehow, unable to reach the platform itself. Saul waited, and once he was sure the things wouldn't climb up, he resumed moving the table. Then plop, something landed on his left shoulder, and something cold and slippery slid down his cheek. His movement froze, his eyes slowly shifted to the left. Something like a tangle of seaweed sat on his shoulder, squirming. No teeth, just little thread-like tendrils, all black. If not for its small size, it would have looked just like the huge ones in the sludge. Chapter 85, Live Up to Your Name. The little tendril blob landed on Saul's left shoulder. Every tendril on it reached upward, twisting and trembling like it was having a seizure. What is this thing? As Saul muttered to himself, the diary that had been quietly floating by his left shoulder glided in front of him with practiced ease. August 26th, year 314 of the lunar calendar, clear skies. Looks like you've discovered another secret space beneath the Wizard Tower. No one knows how many secrets lie buried here. Beneath your feet is the soul-devouring mire that's existed for who knows how long. Right now, the core consciousness of the mire is dancing on your shoulder. It's clear it really, really likes you. Likes you so much, it wants to keep you here forever. Soul-devouring mire, core consciousness. Diary, you're off topic again. You realize that, right? This little tendril blob likes me, Saul muttered. Just then the blob suddenly leapt from Saul's left shoulder, hurling itself into the air. Judging by the trajectory, it was aiming straight at the diary. Whoosh! The tendril blob missed, tumbling off the edge of the platform and straight into the sludge. So, diary, are you sure this core consciousness likes me, not you? The diary didn't respond, merely floated back to his left shoulder. But its behavior just now made Saul a little uneasy. Could that tendril blob actually sense the diary's presence? Otherwise, why would it rush wherever the diary went? It's called the soul-devouring mire, so its essence shouldn't be that blob. It should be the whole sludge pit. Why can the sludge sense the diary? Even the tower master has never noticed my left shoulder. This realization made Saul tense up. If anyone else, like Seed, were to discover the diary in his body, Saul would never know a moment of peace again. A death prophecy, what a powerful golden finger in this world, worth dying for, literally. Did it pull me down here just for the diary? Saul's face darkened. He was no longer in a rush to escape. He carefully observed the entire mire, wondering if there was a way to destroy all of it. Or at least get rid of that core consciousness. Would scorching breath work? If there are corpses buried here, there might be flammable gases trapped underneath. I'll have to be careful not to blow myself up. As Saul pondered, the tendril blob that had fallen down clambered back up the platform. It crawled to Saul's feet, shook off some mud, then began curling its tendrils, bouncing toward Saul again. Saul stretched out his left hand and threw a punch, trying to knock it away. But the moment his fist connected with the blob, it extended countless black tendrils that wrapped around his wrist, latching onto him tightly. That punch ended up hitting nothing. Saul quickly adjusted his stance and drove another fist hard into the ground. But just as his punch was about to land on the stone, his movement halted, abruptly. The blob hadn't dodged or tried to escape at all. It even nuzzled against his left hand, looking like it really liked his left hand in particular. Saul stared at his hand, now practically wearing a black boxing glove made of tendril, and thought, is it not sensing the diary? The diary of a dead wizard, its origins unknown, but clearly extraordinary. Saul believed it was at least at the level of a third-rank true mage. The Tower Master Gorsa was an experienced second-rank mage. There shouldn't be any being stronger than third rank hidden under the tower. And this soul-devouring mire obviously served as a dump for bodies and fragmented souls. Fragmented souls. Saul looked at his left hand, the hand the diary had identified as capable of temporarily storing soul fragments, a soul resin. Could the tendril blob be sensing the residual soul aura in his hand? Then maybe it pounced at the diary not because it sensed the diary itself, but because it detected the soul fragment inside. After all, when Seed was shattered by the electric chair, a shadowy fragment had entered the diary. That shadow had to be a very special part of Seed's soul. Otherwise, the diary wouldn't have absorbed it so readily. But that fragment was gone now. Saul couldn't be sure what exactly the blob had sensed. While Saul mulled this over, the tendril blob kept nuzzling against his hand non-stop. Had enough licking me yet? Snapping out of it, Saul grumpily tried to peel the black blob off his left hand. But it was stubborn. Remove it from one side, it latched back on from another. Panting, Saul finally gave up trying to pull it off. "Ha, are you clinging to me because you want to leave with me?" Saul decided to leave first and figure out what to do with it later. But the moment he said that, The blob froze in place. It didn't move again, but it also didn't let go of his hand. "So do you want to come with me or not?" Saul was now intrigued and started teasing the blob. Glorp, glorp, pop, glorp, pop. Suddenly, the sludge surrounding the platform began to churn. Huge gas bubbles rose and burst. Thick black tendrils as thick as thighs emerged from the sludge, stretching desperately toward the platform but stopping short, afraid to climb up, whipping violently around the base. Whip! Slap! The ferocity of the lashes seemed like they wanted to tear Saul to pieces. Saul immediately realized he'd said the wrong thing. With a forceful yank, he pulled the blob off his hand with ease this time. "Hey now, I never said I was really taking you with me. If you're gonna throw a fit over it, then stay here." The tendril blob seemed to understand him. It trudged to the edge of the platform, looking back 3 times with every step, then finally leapt back down. It really did look like a kid dragged home from school by a scolding parent. But even after it returned to the mire, the disturbance didn't subside. It was like the parents themselves were now angry, arms on hips, warning Saul with deadly seriousness. The tendrils kept thrashing at the muck, and soon, something even more horrifying surfaced before Saul. Pale human faces emerged from the sludge. Their expressions were twisted, eyes glaring at Saul, mouths opening and closing, pleading, cursing. There was no sound, yet Saul's ears buzzed painfully. Even when he covered them, the strange sound waves persisted. Saul had no time to worry about anything else. He turned and stacked 2 lab tables together, climbing up in haste. But he forgot he was only 12. Even on 2 tables, he couldn't reach the ceiling. He tried leaping, caught some soil overhead with one hand, but couldn't pull himself up and fell back down, the tables wobbling dangerously. Huff! The ringing in his ears grew heavier. Saul crouched in pain, clutching his head. He barely managed to stand again but couldn't jump anymore. Just as he was about to fall off the table, a shriveled, yellowed hand suddenly broke through the dirt above and grabbed his arm, yanking him out of the underground world. Saul finally saw daylight again. Two. He spat dirt from his mouth, eyes still shut, thanking his rescuer profusely. Thank you, I really thought I was done for." His rescuer was the gardener. The skin on his hands was as yellow as his face. The gardener's face bore the same radiant smile, though his movements were noticeably stiff. "No need to be afraid. That's just one of the Wizard Tower's old labs. It's been abandoned a long time," the gardener explained warmly. "The wizard reinforced it, but once in a while an apprentice still falls through." Saul felt unwell, like a bad omen had taken root in him. Chapter 86, Little Tale. He cast a cleaning spell on Saul, finally helping him escape the mire of mud and sludge. "I noticed you disappeared earlier, so I figured you might have fallen in, but you really stirred things up down there. I've never seen anyone make the soul-devouring mire that lively before." What could Saul even say to that? "Haha, I'm not really sure what happened. Must have been an accident." The gardener gave an awkward laugh too, not pressing further, and instead changed the subject. "Have you chosen your companion flower?" "Oh right, yes, I've made my choice." Though he'd just gone through a little adventure, Saul hadn't forgotten about the flower bud that had caught his eye, vigorous and full of life. The gardener was efficient, bringing over a small square flower pot and carefully transplanting the companion flower into it for Saul. The freshly moved flower bud looked a little wilted. The gardener immediately chanted a spell, casting a bit of magic to help the bud regain its vitality. "This is a small bag of flower fertilizer." He handed Saul a palm-sized bag. Saul took it and peeked inside. The fertilizer was a pale red loamy mix, speckled with fine granules. Saul couldn't help but recall one of his possible deaths, being turned into fertilizer. He gave the fertilizer a silent 2 seconds of mourning, then tucked the bag away. "Mr. Gardener, are you also an apprentice here?" Saul thought tending the garden looked like a pretty good gig, seemed relaxing, and it let you stay out of the sunless, oppressive wizard tower for long stretches. But the man looked to be in his 40s or 50s. Could he be a third-rank apprentice? That seemed like a serious waste of talent. The gardener just chuckled good-naturedly. I was when I was alive." Saul jolted so hard, he almost dropped the flower pot. He quietly took 2 steps back and gave the gardener a respectful bow. "Thank you for everything today. I'll be heading back to find Mentor Kaz now." The gardener didn't seem to realize he'd just said something shocking. He simply smiled and nodded, watching Saul walk away at a brisk pace. As he watched Saul's retreating back, his eyes suddenly narrowed. From the back of Saul's neck, a black, slick tendril about the width of a thumb suddenly snaked out. It swayed in the air twice before retreating again. The gardener's pleasant smile faded into nothing. He opened his mouth slightly, as if he wanted to call out, but in the end, no sound came out. He slowly turned and walked back to the little wooden cabin, sitting stiffly on the tiny bench inside, gazing at the garden with a serene smile. As the sun set, the garden fell silent except for the rustling of wind and leaves. The gardener remained stiffly seated, bathed in moonlight. There was no gardener. He was clearly a scarecrow made of straw. Tufts of grass protruded from the seams of his clothes and pants. His eyes were 2 gray stones, and his nose was a long tree branch. The whole scarecrow had a waxy, yellow hue. Someone had painted a garish smile on his face, using blood-red paint. The evening breeze swept through, and the companion flowers bobbed their heads in dance, while the scent of fresh bread filled the garden. Meanwhile, Saul returned to the morgue with his carefully chosen companion flower. He decided to raise the flower here. Although the morgue wasn't particularly filled with corpse gas, he figured its atmosphere suited the companion flower's tastes. Maybe it would grow faster. The flower he'd chosen resembled a peony. Its bud was especially large, and its petals were a buttery yellow, tinged pink and white at the tips. Saul placed it in a corner of the room and mixed in a little fertilizer. The bud, previously drooping without sunlight, perked right up again. Saul found it amusing. He playfully nudged the bud with his finger before returning to his experiment table. He resumed his research on his left hand. After all, this was a spirit resin even the journal had deemed noteworthy. It had to be valuable. If it could absorb other soul fragments, it might offer Saul another channel for gathering information about the world. The problem was that spirit resin was far beyond his current knowledge. After a long time studying, Saul still had no real direction. He'd have to ask a senior or a mentor, or maybe check the library for any related texts. Even low-quality spirit resin had already brought him substantial benefits. If he could improve the quality of spirit resin produced from plastic bones, then his body modification projects could reach a whole new level. Taking this opportunity to reconstruct his left hand and boost his magic again. If it worked well, Saul was even considering including his right hand in the upgrade. Knock, knock, knock. A knocking sound interrupted his research. "Who is it?" Saul closed his notebook. "It's Hayden, his senior from next door." Hayden hadn't approached him directly before. Was there an issue with corpse handling? Saul walked over and cautiously opened the door. Hayden wore a slightly forced smile. I heard you came in first during the entrance test. Congratulations." "Just a friendly visit." "Thank you. Is there something I can help you with?" Saul asked directly. We're both first-rank apprentices now. No need to keep calling me senior all the time. Just call me Hayden." Saul smiled but didn't answer. "I actually wanted to ask if you've considered working in the second morgue." "Why do you ask? Are you planning to leave?" Not exactly. I just think there are better materials to be found in the second morgue, so if you're interested, I'd be willing to swap with you. So it was a friendly offer. Was a newcomer's first place ranking really that influential? No, it had to be more than that. Saul thought back to Anne's invitation, to Rum's relatively sincere one, and to mentor Kaz deliberately using the flower selection trip as an excuse to warn him not to change mentors. It must have been the mentor's sudden interest that made Hayden want to trade jobs, hopping to curry favor. Saul was tempted, but also wary of hidden motives. Then he remembered. His current focus was on spirit resin, and its main component was plastic bones. The key ingredient in plastic bones, bones with spiritual properties. If he stayed in the third morgue, then aside from the blind and deaf brute outside, no one else would know what condition the bodies were in after going into the big box. But if he moved to the second morgue, Hayden's downstream post, it'd be easy for Hayden to deduce what material Saul was harvesting. And spirit resin was the core of his body modification project. He didn't want to risk exposing that to others. With that in mind, Saul smiled politely and shook his head. No need, Hayden. Based on ability and experience, you're much more suited for the second morgue. I'm fine right where I am. Hayden hadn't expected a refusal. He was a bit surprised but also somewhat pleased. After all, from his perspective, the second morgue still offered more benefits. They exchanged a few more pleasantries before Saul saw Hayden out. At no point did he invite Hayden into the room. Once the door closed, Saul returned to studying body modifications. But if he really wanted to upgrade his right hand next, he'd need to prepare another material. Tonight, Saul finally received a first-rank apprentice as a client. He packaged up the client's brain and headed that night to Kangsha's dormitory. This was the first time Saul had gone to see Kangsha voluntarily, and alone since killing Seed. He'd be lying if he said he wasn't nervous, but Kangsha was still extremely useful. When she opened the door and saw Saul, the eyeballs in her milky white fluid swirled around a few times. You came quickly. I thought you'd be hiding out for a few days in regret. She stepped aside and gestured him in. Saul walked to the center of the room and placed the box he was holding on the table, opening it to reveal a round object wrapped in pale yellow leather. A faint stench immediately drifted out. Chapter 87, Who Lives Across the Hall. Kangsha wrinkled her nose, pulled out the head, and let her eyeball spin once around it before nodding in satisfaction. Not bad, but you still haven't removed the stench from the leather wrapping. Sorry, Senior. I tried a few cleaning methods, but none seemed to work. Forget it. Kangsha seemed low on energy as she tossed the leather back into the box. I'll be leaving the tower for a while, she said casually as she sat back down. For the next 6 months, you won't need to bring me anything. Saul froze mid-motion while closing the box, lifting his head in surprise. You're leaving the tower. In the past 3 months, he'd never seen Kangsha leave. He thought her experiments didn't require it. My research has reached a pause. Staying here any longer won't yield results. Besides, going out might bring new opportunities. Kangsha tilted her frightening head slightly. When the time comes, you could apply to leave too. Even though you're not a second-rank apprentice yet, the mentors seem to favor you. For capable people, they're happy to make exceptions. Going outside, Saul had thought of it too. He wanted to see the normal world again. But he still had so much to learn, it wasn't time to indulge just yet. Senior, before you leave, could I trade something with you? Kangsha tossed the head in her hand, indifferent to the blood splattering onto herself and the floor. A trade? Other than heads, do you have anything of value? One of her eyeballs floated out, staring at Saul's left hand. If it's your left hand. Not that. Saul subtly tucked his left hand into his sleeve. I've been working in the corpse room for a while now. I've collected some mutative materials, Maybe something you'd be interested in. Maybe, hearing it wasn't the hand, Kanksha lost a lot of interest. Even the floating eye retracted. What do you want in return? I want the potion you used on me back then. The one that dissolves flesh but leaves the bones under your control. Kanksha's red lips slowly curled into a grin. Hee ha 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 ha. She laughed so hard her whole body trembled, taking a long while to calm down. You little maniac, you're even crazier than me. Saul didn't think it was that extreme. He just wanted to dissolve his palm, not his brain. Seeing his determination, Kanksha nodded. All right, I've got a bottle on hand. Senior, may I ask how long the potion's effects last? If stored properly, about a month. Beyond that, the corrosive power drops off, and you can't guarantee bone flexibility. Kanksha didn't hide the info. It was just a minor detail. A month, that might not be enough time for Saul to improve his body modification plans. And there was no guarantee Kanksha would return from her trip. If she died out there, where would Saul get another potion like this? Senior, if I wanted the formula instead, would that be possible? Sure, for a price, Kanksha was direct. Are you sure your pile of scraps can afford it? Saul gritted his teeth and pulled out a small test tube from his robes. It was sealed with a wooden cork, wrapped tightly in layers of cotton padding for shock protection. He began carefully unwrapping it, slowly and deliberately. At first, Kanksha didn't pay much attention, sitting lazily in her chair. But as the contents of the tube came into view, she slowly sat upright. Inside the tube was a milky white thread, suspended quietly in a transparent oil. What is that? Kanksha could sense the spiritual energy, at least at the level of a second-rank apprentice. It's Seed's tracking thread. I wonder if it interests you. He had extracted it from the back of Seed's neck during the autopsy. At the time, the diary had erupted in warnings, and only when Saul dropped the thread into the oil did the danger finally subside. To him, the thing was too risky and of no use. Better to trade it for something valuable. Plus, since tracking threads were unique to each person, they couldn't be reused, just repurposed as materials or references. So their overall value wasn't that high. To Saul, trading it for Kanksha's potion was well worth it. You really, don't hold back, Kanksha murmured as she stepped forward, carefully taking the test tube and holding it up to examine. Her dozen or so eyeballs floated into her glass container, circling around the tube, all pupils fixed on it. He specialized in water magic, but his tracking thread has fire-like properties. Did he really choose this one himself? Can someone else choose it for you? Saul asked curiously. They can, but only someone who knows the apprentice extremely well. Better than they know themselves, Kanksha answered, storing the tube away. Then she moved to her workbench, picked up pen and paper and began writing. You're being so generous, I won't shortchange you. Here's the formula for the bone dissolution potion, and here's the modified version for hardening skin. I've even written out the formula transformation logic. Swish, swish. The sound of ink on paper was music to the ears. Every stroke felt like earning a credit. Kanksha was surprisingly generous this time. Saul couldn't help but rise and lean over the table. As expected of a top-tier second-rank apprentice's formulas, he couldn't understand more than half of it. But that was fine. He could always study later. Given his current abilities, status, and backing, the one thing he had was time to study. Once she was finished, Kanksha stood, sliced neatly along the paper's spine, and flicked the sheet toward Saul. He caught the formula with his left hand, carefully folded it twice, and tucked it into his chest pocket. I've got the materials here if you want to make a batch to test it. No need, I trust you. Saul patted his chest like it held 1,000 magic crystals. Trusting people that easily isn't a good thing. Aren't you afraid I'll harm you again? Kanksha was Byron. She didn't appreciate blind trust. But Saul just looked up with a grin and said, From what I've seen, harming me wouldn't benefit you as much as trading with me would. A good wizard values profit. Concha licked her lips with a long tongue. You're only 12. I can't imagine how many people you'll mess with once you grow up. Poor Byron, I can't tell if he's lucky or doomed to have met you. Saul felt falsely accused. Honestly, this is just how he's always been. His mind had already solidified the moment he arrived in this world. With the exchange complete, Saul prepared to leave. He politely bid Concha farewell, walked to the door and opened it. Across from Concha's dorm was another second-rank apprentice's room. It was from that very door that blood had once oozed out, triggering the diary's death prediction. That unsettling blood was what had driven Saul to knock on Concha's door in desperation. Now that door remained tightly shut. Saul, hand resting on Concha's newly replaced doorknob, asked quietly, "Senior, there's something I've never figured out. Who lives across from you?" Concha stood behind her workbench, lips curling into a faint smile. "Who knows?" Chapter 88, Exposed. Saul didn't wait for Concha's answer. Not that he really expected one anyway. Leaving her room, he continued upward, passing through dimly lit corridors and ignoring the whispers from the shadows. He headed straight to the 14th floor of the West Tower. Dorm 1416. This was Senior Byron's new home. Wizard apprentices could choose to move to the corresponding floor after their promotion, or stay put if they didn't want the hassle. Most chose to move. After all, the hardware facilities differed a lot between floors. This was Saul's first time visiting Byron's dorm, and it was late at night. He didn't know if Byron was already asleep. You couldn't expect all apprentices to be night owls like Concha. Saul lightly knocked on the door 3 times, then lowered his hand, intending to wait a moment. But the next second, the door opened inward on its own. Saul poked his head in, seeing no one in the living room. He stepped inside. The place was a mess, like the owner had half finished unpacking and then gone to bed. Many boxes were open, their contents untouched. Others were stacked so high they blocked the view of the room. "Senior Byron." No answer. Saul figured he wasn't home. With the mental power of a third-rank apprentice, he couldn't possibly sleep through all that. But if he wasn't home, and the door wasn't locked, could it have been left open intentionally for him? Saul stepped forward, climbing mountains and crossing seas, until he found the workbench hidden behind a pile of boxes. The workbench was just as cluttered, covered with all sorts of things. Only a palm-sized clear space was left at the center, with a letter sitting on it. On the letter were the words, "For Saul's eyes only." "Still such ugly handwriting," Saul muttered, shaking his head. He picked up the letter and unfolded it. It read, "This paper can only be touched by Saul. If anyone else touches it, don't bother reading, go find the antidote. You've got 10 seconds left to live. 987654332. Saul, I've received my first third-rank apprentice mission and will be away for a while. I still owe you 8 credits. If you're in a hurry, you can take the red potion on the table as compensation. If not, wait till I get back. Unfortunately, I don't have many friends in the tower and no one owes me favors. I can't ask anyone to look after you, so take care of yourself. I hope you'll still be alive when I return. If you die, well, guess we'll call the debt even. Hopefully, I'll complete my first mission successfully and come back alive. If you're worried I won't, go ahead and take the red potion as collateral. That's all, goodbye. Oh, right, if one of your friends finds this letter instead, you can tell them it's not poisoned. No antidote needed. If it's not your friend, well, too bad. Still owe you 8 credits, Byron." After reading, Saul couldn't help but laugh. He never told Senior Byron that countdown joke, yet the guy had come up with it himself. Despite looking like a total dope, Sometimes Byron was surprisingly sharp. Saul had originally come to ask Byron about spirit resin, but that clearly wasn't happening now. He could only hope Byron returned safely. He left the red potion untouched, letting it sit where it was. He didn't even check what it was, afraid he might not be able to resist. Saul casually destroyed the letter and left the dorm, which looked more like a garbage heap than a living space. Back in the hallway, the dorm door closed itself again. Saul was sure that after tonight, it wouldn't open so easily anymore. Senior Byron, gone too. Looks like I'll have to ask Senior Mark tomorrow instead. Though he knows I've done body modifications, he doesn't know the materials I used. He probably won't connect it to spirit resin. Saul turned, ready to head back to sleep. Just then, he noticed something odd. His shadow on the ground looked like it had grown. Something long and thin flicked past the back of his neck. Immediately alert, Saul froze and readied his incantations and potions. He slowly raised his left hand, reaching toward the back of his neck. All the while, his peripheral vision kept a close eye on his shadow. When his hand finally touched the skin at the base of his neck, he felt nothing unusual. His shadow hadn't changed either. Was it just my imagination, or has the thing already left? He entered a semi-immersive meditative state, scanning his surroundings. No signs of unusual spirits. Still, he didn't let down his guard, cautiously leaving the third-rank apprentice dorm area. Only when he returned to his own dorm did he finally breathe a sigh of relief. Walking around the tower at night really is dangerous. With Concha and Byron both gone, I'd better stop wandering late at night. After lunch the next day, Saul hurried to Mentor Kaz's lab to look for Senior Mark and buy some knowledge. Just as he was about to push open the door, he heard voices from inside. "It's good you're willing to work hard. If your uncle had been a little more diligent, he wouldn't have left the tower at 30. I'll keep working hard, Senior Cole. Can I assist you with your experiments?" "I suppose that's fine. You already worked here with Mark, so you've got experience. Saves me the trouble of finding someone new." "Thank you so much, Senior Cole." "No need to thank me. Working with a cute girl like you will definitely improve my mood." Hearing this, Saul walked in and saw the second-rank apprentice named Cole, his hand resting on Angela's shoulder. Cole was a bit chubby, with a warm smile on his face. He looked gentle. Angela kept her usual bright smile, seemingly unaware that anything was off. Noticing someone enter, Cole casually pulled back his hand and nodded at Saul. "This is Mentor Kaz's lab. What do you need?" "Hello, Senior. I was looking for Senior Mark. He's not here anymore." Angela gently reminded Cole that Saul was also under Mentor Kaz. Cole raised an eyebrow, then his smile brightened even more. "So you're Saul, the first-rank apprentice the Mentor values most now." He walked over to Saul. "Mark, gone on a field mission. I'm handling his work now. If you need anything, you can ask me." He seemed quite enthusiastic. Saul politely thanked him. "Thanks, Senior, but I was just returning something to Senior Mark. Since he's away, I'll wait till he's back. I'll take my leave now, goodbye." Cole looked a bit disappointed Saul was leaving so soon, but didn't stop him. He just invited him to come by whenever. Saul offered some polite words, glanced briefly at Angela standing silently behind Cole, and left the lab. Back in the hallway, Saul felt a bit lost. Overnight, the three seniors he was most familiar with had all left the tower. Now he had no choice but to go to the library and search blindly. The library was nearly empty. Whether borrowing or returning books, everyone there moved quickly, unwilling to linger. As Saul entered, he noticed the anxious middle-aged man who usually sat on the left was gone. Did someone trigger that holographic projection again? "Are you here to borrow books?" a haughty voice called from the right. Saul turned and saw a young man of about 18 or 19, chin tilted up, looking down his nose at him. "If you're borrowing, go in. If not, get lost." Looking closer, Saul realized the arrogant youth looked nearly identical to the anxious, middle-aged man from before. Chapter 89. Deep within the library. "I want to borrow a book." "If you want to borrow one, go in and check the index and descriptions. What are you looking at me for? Think you'll see a ghost on my face or something?" Well then, this young man's temper wasn't much different from that elderly librarian's. "I'm looking for some books about soul fragments, but I'm not sure where to find them." "Then go in and look through the shelves, one row at a time." The young man curled his lips in a cryptic smile. "But the books about souls are deeper inside. I'm afraid I might get lost in there." "Then don't go looking." The youth crossed his arms and looked down on Saul. "A first-rank apprentice, and you want to study souls." Of course Saul wasn't going to give up so easily. Seeing that the young man had no intention of helping, Saul walked to the side of the library. "If you don't know, then I'll just wait for the other administrator. I imagine he's more familiar with the place." The young man sneered. "Idiot, can't you tell I'm the administrator?" Saul's mouth twitched. This guy really had a rotten attitude, but Saul held it in. "You're the administrator too. I just wanted to ask the middle-aged one. He seemed more experienced." As soon as the young man heard that, his face darkened. He flung his arms down, and in the blink of an eye, his body slid smoothly right up to Saul's face. His expression was deathly pale, lips purple, and his eyeballs bulging as if they might pop from their sockets. Saul was startled and instinctively took half a step back, raising his hands in front of his chest, eyes wary. "Bullshit, whatever he knows, I know too. That coward's scared of everything all day long. What's the use of experience?" The more the young man ranted, the more frightening his appearance became. Saul swallowed hard but tried to stand his ground. "But you didn't know just now." "The hell I did. You mean soul fragments." The youth's mouth stretched open wide, revealing nothing but a deep red void, no teeth, no tongue in sight. That's when Saul realized the man's voice wasn't even coming from his mouth. But where it was coming from, he couldn't tell. "Soul fragments, soul-type stuff, spiritual body-type stuff. It's all on shelf 14, column 4. Like spirits, go down like wraiths, go up, want to discipline a soul, go behind." The young man jerked his chin. "If it's in this library, there's nothing I don't know." "Amazing." Saul gave him a thumbs up, then turned and walked toward the back of the library. The rows of shelves stood tall, shrouded in a dense white mist. After just a few steps, the main entrance was completely out of view. To keep track of how far he'd gone, Saul counted the rows aloud as he walked. 1, 2, 13, 14. This is the one." He continued rightward until he reached the 4th column and stopped. Turning his head to the left, he saw rows of books, some thick, some thin, some new, others ancient. Unlike the more organized front rows, the books here were disordered and clearly lacking upkeep. It seemed few people ever came this deep to borrow books. Spirits below, wraiths above, no normal souls. Saul began browsing the middle of the shelf. Of the books with legible spines, over half were in Noah script or other unknown languages, with only a few in common. And all the common ones were labeled as storybooks. The ones in Noah script were mostly definitions, observation notes, and the like. Saul carefully scanned the central row, then lowered his head slightly to look at the one below. What the percentage is. Something at the edge of his vision. What was that at his feet? The bottom row of the shelf didn't seem to be holding books. There was a person lying there. An arm, the corner of a shoe, they stuck out from under the bottom shelf. Saul hadn't felt this weak in the knees in a long time. It felt like every hair on his body was standing on end. "Don't think, don't look," he told himself silently, forcing his eyes to scan only the middle rows, locking his neck at a fixed angle. At the same time, he quietly chanted a necromancy-repelling incantation under his breath, ready to fire it the moment anything went wrong. Step by trembling step, Saul edged his way to the end of the bookshelf. The person, lying there, still hadn't moved a muscle. He turned around to check behind the shelf. After a quick sweep with his eyes, he saw it was thankfully filled with books. Still, he didn't dare let his guard down. Just imagining what might be hiding behind the tomes was enough to keep him from crouching. What if he made eye contact with something? Fortunately, in the section about disciplining souls, he finally found a book that seemed to be about preserving soul fragments. How a Madman Teaches You to Raise a Soul Servant. Saul pulled the book out and skimmed the first few pages. He instantly decided this was the one. He hurried back toward the entrance. But halfway through, he suddenly turned and walked in the opposite direction. He went on for dozens of meters until he finally broke free of the mist, spotting the main entrance of the library and a couple of first-rank apprentices loitering around the front shelves. Phew! Saul was pale as a sheet. Once he was out of the white fog, he couldn't help grabbing onto the nearest bookshelf for support. Just as he'd left the 14th row, he'd inexplicably felt like the way deeper into the library was the way out. If he hadn't noticed how the shelves were getting more and more chaotic, he wouldn't even have realized that he'd been going in the wrong direction. He hadn't thought about it, hadn't analyzed it. He just turned and left on instinct. His journal hadn't given him a warning, which meant his life hadn't been in danger yet. But if he'd gone any deeper, who knew what might have happened? Saul's drained expression caught the attention of a few apprentices near the entrance. When they realized it was him, they exchanged glances and walked over. "Saul, are you okay?" one of them asked with mild concern. "I'm fine, thanks." Saul looked at their vaguely familiar faces, then added after a moment, "The 10th row and beyond in the library is dangerous. I wouldn't recommend going past it unless you're at least second rank." Huh, the two of them hadn't expected their kind gesture to earn them a warning. They turned and glanced toward the misty depths, eyes filled with unease. Meanwhile, Saul seized the chance to slip past them and approach the entrance. The arrogant young man was gone. In his place was the always terrified middle-aged man, curled up on a bench with his head buried deep between his knees. Since becoming an apprentice, Saul had borrowed books a few times and knew the process well. He walked to about 2 meters from the middle-aged man and spoke softly. "Hello, I'd like to borrow this book." The man slowly lifted his head, revealing a face ghostly pale. 50 magic crystals plus 2 credit points, 10 days. That expensive, and it even cost credit points. Saul stared at the book he'd risked his life for and asked tentatively, "Can I borrow it for 5 days?" The man gave a jerky, painfully slow shake of the head. There was even a minimum borrowing period. Saul gritted his teeth and paid up. Once the procedure was complete, he carefully stored the book in his backpack, then hugged the pack to his chest. The middle-aged man cast a fearful glance around before retreating back into his usual fetal position. Saul glanced once more into the library, the white mist already shrouding everything inside. The two apprentices were still lingering near the first row. He turned to leave. But after taking just 2 steps, Saul was forced to stop again. 2 people were standing at the library's entrance. Lockeye had his hands in his pockets, a faint smile on his face as he curiously sized Saul up. Beside him, Doe stood silently, head slightly bowed. Chapter 90, The Seaweed Dumpling. The last time Saul had seen Lockeye, the latter had openly invited him to join the Mutual Aid Society. If it hadn't been for Mentor Kaz suddenly showing up and calling Saul away, he would have had to come up with a way to politely decline. Now running into him face to face, would Lockeye bring it up again? Last time I asked if you wanted to join the Mutual Aid Society. Have you given it any thought? Lockeye smiled as he took a step forward, blocking the library's exit. He really didn't beat around the bush, straight to the point. Saul tensed instinctively, but quickly reminded himself that he was no longer just a clueless newcomer. Sorry, Senior Lockeye. My job keeps me really busy. I don't have the time to participate in any extracurriculars. I hope you'll understand. His tone was respectful, but left no room for negotiation. Yet Lockeye stepped forward again, closing the distance between them to less than a meter. Are you really that busy, or are you worried about this? He raised his hand and bent his index fingers twice, like two little worms. The guy had actually admitted to the existence of the parasite. Saul frowned slightly. This wouldn't be an easy conversation. But to his surprise, Lockeye didn't press the issue or extend another invitation. Haha, I get it, but you don't need to be so nervous. That little thing is just a failsafe to make sure Mutual Aid's internal information stays confidential. Talented apprentices like you, Saul, we trust your character. We wouldn't use something like that on you. Thanks, Senior, but I really don't have the time these days. Seeing Lockeye ease up, Saul angled his feet and tried to squeeze past him and the door. All right, but even if you don't want to join the Mutual Aid Society, you're still welcome at our exchange meetings. You work in East Block, second floor, right? If you're still unsure, you can ask Hayden. He's always had a great working relationship with us. Exchange meetings, Hayden attends too. Saul replied casually, if I get the chance. Perfect, just find Doze anytime, he'll bring you along. With that, Lockeye stepped aside and made way for Saul. Saul glanced at the two of them, nodded, and picked up his pace out of the library. Lockeye remained where he was, smiling faintly as he watched Saul disappear down the corridor. After a while, he suddenly spoke to the man behind him. Ever since all your friends died, you've gotten a lot quieter. Doze flinched and gritted his teeth but said nothing. Lockeye didn't turn around. He simply raised his hand and tapped twice, accurately, on the top of Doze's skull. That's a good thing. To grow up, one must leave some things behind. Over the next few days, Saul poured all of his spare time into two books: How a Madman Teaches You to Raise a Soul Servant and Speculations on Soul Vessels. Both books mentioned methods of preserving spiritual forms and discussed soul resin. The latter read more like a theoretical overview, while the former had more hands-on detail. Soul resin was a broad term that covered many subtypes. Depending on the type, a soul could be preserved for anywhere from a few days to several decades. With certain enhancements, its longevity could be further extended. In addition to basic preservation, many soul resins had special side effects. For example, the plastic bone in Saul's left hand could increase his sensitivity to dark elemental particles and boost his mana. Good quality soul resins were highly valuable materials in the wizarding world. Unfortunately, according to the classifications described in the books, Saul's plastic bone was among the lowest grade of soul resins. A soul could survive inside it for only 1 or 2 days. After that, it would dissipate. Natural soul resins were rare. Most were synthetic, meaning their formulas could be continuously refined. If Saul could improve his plastic bone, not only could he extend the soul's preservation time, but he could also enhance his own mana and dark element perception. Optimizing an existing body modification formula was a lot easier than inventing one from scratch. That moment, Saul knew he was on the right path. His pitiful little magic pool finally had the potential to grow again. But this line of research was like reading far beyond his grade level. Words would occasionally pop up without even a footnote to explain them. To understand those terms, Saul often had to borrow other books or consult a mentor. This deep dive gave him a wealth of knowledge, and also deepened his understanding of the Soul Vessel book given to him by the Tower Master. The Tower Master must be a dark attribute specialist. All the research he wants me to do is about souls and corpses. The tower even has 2 whole floors dedicated to the corpse lab. Clearly it's a priority. I wonder what the Tower Master himself is studying. Probably some ultra-high-level wizard project. 2 months later, Saul finally made a small breakthrough in optimizing soul resin. He discovered that, during the process of creating the solvent that dissolved the plastic bone, one of the ingredients could be swapped out to reduce impurities that harmed the soul. He still needed to test which material would work as a replacement. At this point, the diary wasn't much help. It could warn him which materials not to use, but couldn't tell him which ones would actually help. He had to rely entirely on his own knowledge and intuition. Now, he truly understood what a regular wizard's research process was like. Step by step, forming hypotheses and testing them. If a hypothesis failed or couldn't be tested, it had to be shelved. That day, he went to the registration office and swapped out a batch of materials for his next round of testing. This one static cloud, why the hell did I request this? Was I brain dead? Saul slapped his forehead. I know the plastic bone is vulnerable to electricity. Why would I add an electrical component? Grumbling to himself, a new idea suddenly sparked in Saul's mind. Since the plastic bone is afraid of electricity, maybe I should prepare a countermeasure for that weakness in advance. If I end up fighting someone, it could be my fatal flaw. Note this down, note this down. Saul quickly jotted the idea into a different notebook. He often came up with odd ideas during research, but since he didn't have the time to explore them all in depth, he just logged them for later. After scribbling down the inspiration, Saul straightened up and looked over the remaining materials. All right, which one should I try next? He muttered, stroking his chin deep in thought. At that moment, a black tendril about as thick as a thumb coiled around a test tube and lifted it in front of Saul's face. This one, it's on the alkaline side. Might it mess with the solvent's corrosion properties? Whoa! Saul suddenly realized something was very wrong and leapt out of his chair. But instead of backing off, the black tendril was pulled even closer to his face, as if something was dragging it. Slick black surface, sinuous motion, that familiar way it curled around objects. You're a soul-devouring mire. Saul looked behind him, trying to see the tendril's origin, but it spun with him, always staying out of view. He moved again, and the tendril mirrored his every motion. His face froze. Slowly, he raised a hand and followed the tendril backward. And at the back of his neck, he felt the base of the tendril. The thing was growing out of his neck. Saul immediately bolted toward the corpse lab's main door, torn between whether to run straight to Mentor Kaz or just dash next door to the senior apprentice's room. Meanwhile, the tendril still held onto the test tube, calmly following alongside him. Just as Saul's fingers were about to touch the lab's scarlet doors, he suddenly stopped. He glanced at his left shoulder. Hey, diary bro, you're just gonna sit there. The diary remained quiet, clearly enjoying the show. Saul narrowed his eyes and grabbed the junction between the tendril and his neck. The diary didn't respond. Saul started pulling. Pop it. The black tendril came right off. He touched the back of his neck with his other hand. No wounds, no second tendril growing. So maybe it wasn't parasitic. I must have just dragged a piece of it out somehow. But then how is it still active, even detached from the body? The black tendril didn't speak. Even after being plucked off, it still held the test tube and presented it to Saul. Now a bit calmer, Saul snatched the test tube from its grasp. Fine, before I figure out what the hell you even are, let's see what this seaweed dumplings recommended potion is good for. Chapter 91, Go Back. The gardener once said that the soul-devouring mire lived in an abandoned laboratory, which meant it was likely a creature bred or modified by a wizard in the past. And someone had fallen down there before Saul. Judging by the gardener's tone, no one had died from it. So the soul-devouring mire probably wasn't an especially aggressive creature. Saul was willing to try the method the tendril had recommended for two reasons. First, it seemed sensitive to souls, so it might have an innate intuition towards soul resin materials. Second, he had no other leads at the moment. He rewrote his formulas and adjusted his combinations. Saul took out the alternative ingredients he'd found and swapped in the reagent rolled up by the seaweed dumpling. Of course, before he tested it, he had the diary verify the goods. By now, Saul was already very practiced in mixing this potion. It didn't take long before he saw the underwater vortex. Doesn't seem all that different. Saul held the test tube in one hand and picked up his pen with the other, continuing to record the reaction. Next, once the reagent had fully reacted, Saul brought out a small piece of refined plastic bone and slowly poured the new reagent over it. The plastic bone softened again, and Saul prodded it gently with a glass stirring rod. Softer now. Saul finally noticed a slight difference in the result, but its properties don't seem to have changed much. He tilted his head and noticed that the root of the black tendril had somehow snuck back behind his neck again, its tip waving beside his cheek. It occasionally floated near the diary, as if it could vaguely sense something. Other times, it weaved through the materials on Saul's table, looking like it was about to tie itself into a knot. Back, Saul gave a low command. The black tendril immediately retracted beside his cheek, surprisingly obedient and docile. The diary has no reaction to the softened plastic bone. Seems this step can't yet be called soul resin. Saul's left hand had gained the diary's recognition, and the not-so-flattering name, soul resin, only after absorbing seed soul fragment. Maybe what's missing is the soul fragment as a catalyst. Saul jotted his theory into his notes. But where do I get soul fragments? He muttered. The books mention that ordinary people's souls dispersed very quickly. Normally, only apprentices with sufficient mental strength could produce relatively stable mental fragments. Unless ordinary people experienced corruption or extremely intense mental fluctuations, their souls were unlikely to linger long, so soul fragments were rare. Even working in the morgue, Saul rarely came across them. And even if he did, chances were they'd be snatched up in the first or second morgue rooms. But he couldn't give up the plastic bone material just for the sake of a soul fragment. Am I really going to have to buy them? His wallet was drying up at an alarming rate. Saul frowned with worry. Once he burned through the spoils he'd collected, could he really scrape by on just his monthly credits? Well, Tower Master, Ralph of the Bloodthorn family has come to visit you. A blonde-haired, blue-eyed male second-rank apprentice stood at the doorway of the lounge and bowed deeply to the man inside, Gorsa. This was the 18th floor of the Wizard Tower. From the 18th to the 21st floors, all belonged solely to Tower Master Gorsa. There was a grand reception room on the 18th floor, luxuriously decorated. Everything the kings and nobles sought and loved could be found there. But that was only for entertaining ordinary guests. Beside the main reception room was a small, unassuming lounge. This was where the Tower Master usually met with mentors and apprentices. There were no typical tables or chairs, only couches wrapped in soft cotton and a thick plush carpet that swallowed the sound of footsteps. The walls of the lounge were lined with flower racks, upon which bloomed the very companion flowers Saul had once chosen. At the moment, the companion flowers were swaying in perfect unison, like they were dancing or craning their necks to sing. On the outer wall were two nearly floor-to-ceiling rectangular windows. The frosted glass let in sunlight that was faintly dim. The master of the entire wizard tower, Gorsa, sat on the widest couch in the lounge. His entire body was wrapped in a huge dark red cloak, with only a sliver of pink jaw showing beneath the hood. Standing across from him was an old, hunched man with graying hair and a wrinkled face. He was respectful, though visibly lacking in spirit. It was none other than Saul's official mentor, Kaz. The two were in the middle of a conversation when the apprentice messenger interrupted. Gorsa turned to the apprentice, the Bloodthorn family. The apprentice bowed even lower. He is from the family of Seed, a second-rank apprentice in the tower. Kaz recalled it at the apprentice's prompt. Ralph of the Bloodthorn family. Didn't he die? I remember the burial was rather hasty. Oh, right. Gorsa suddenly grew interested and turned to Kaz. The Bloodthorn family's body modification magic was quite interesting. Shame it didn't align with our research. Otherwise, he would have made a decent mentor here. Kaz gave an awkward smile and softly reminded Gorsa, Tower Master, Seed was the apprentice killed by Saul, and Seed was Ralph's grandson. Oh, so what's Ralph coming for? This question was directed at the apprentice messenger. Still bowed, the apprentice answered immediately. Ralph wishes to retrieve his grandson's corpse. Heh, Gorsa let out a soft laugh. Ralph's a dark attribute wizard himself. How could he possibly think any corpse would be left? Should we just grab some random bone from underground and hand it over? Kaz. Just kidding. Seeing Kaz's expression, Gorsa knew what he was thinking. He is, after all, a proper first-rank wizard. We can't be that rude. Kaz realized that whatever the Tower Master took seriously, he'd better take seriously too. So he offered, perhaps he wants to find out who the killer is. After all, that was the apprentice you originally had your eye on. Good point, Gorsa nodded. Then, without warning, he vanished. Kaz inhaled sharply. The cold breath slipped through his teeth, making his entire jaw ache. Something told him the Tower Master wasn't going to do anything good. Seeing the apprentice still bowing stiffly, Kaz waved him away. Then he walked over to one of the frosted windows and gently wiped it with his hand, revealing the outside scene. At close range and extremely clear. As expected, the Tower Master had already appeared before Ralph, who was waiting outside. Ralph had just stepped out of his carriage. Dressed in black noble robes, he stood solemnly before the entrance of the wizard tower, wearing a look of grief. He didn't expect to see Gorsa so easily. After all, the man was a second-rank wizard, powerful, respected, with real status. It wouldn't be strange if someone like Ralph, a first-rank wizard with little backing, had to wait half a day just to get a word in. But what Ralph didn't expect was that not even 5 minutes after sending his message, a figure suddenly appeared before him. Ralph had never seen Gorsa, but he instantly recognized him. Teleportation. No wonder Gorsa was considered one of the top second-rank wizards in the entire wizarding world. He could already touch on spatial magic, a domain typically reserved for fourth-rank wizards. Jealousy surged within Ralph like madness. He became even more determined to retrieve the diary of a dead wizard. He was certain that once he activated the diary, he could use the knowledge within to ascend to the fourth rank. By then, neither Gorsa nor the family behind him would be able to do anything but lick Ralph's boots. I know why you're here, Gorsa said gently, despite being wrapped entirely in his cloak, his tone as soft as a comforting whisper. Since you've joined the Wizard Tower, even in death, the body belongs to me. Go back. Ralph knew things wouldn't go smoothly, but he couldn't give up. Even learning the killer's identity would be enough. He could lie in wait to ambush them. But negotiations required back and forth, so Ralph first made a more outrageous request. I understand, my lord. It is Seed's honor to have contributed to your research, but I hope to personally take revenge. In return, I'm willing to offer the Bloodthorn family's secret body modification techniques. Gorsa seemed to consider it. Was it working? The corners of Ralph's mouth began to twitch tighter with anticipation. But the next moment, Gorsa raised a hand, revealing a pale pink palm. Go back, did you hear me? Ralph felt a wave of deep humiliation, but he stifled his rage, trying to appear even more humble. Honorable Lord Gorsa. A blinding white light suddenly burst from Gorsa's palm. What? Ralph had only enough time to think before he felt his entire body ignite. No pain, but he was burning. Behind him, the old butler Hunt, who had silently held the horse reins, watched in shock as his master's body, after the white flash, twisted and lumped like hair caught in open flame. An aged head fell with a thud onto two upright legs. The three parts rolled into one. Chapter 92. Everyone handles their own trouble. Gorsa turned to the old butler and asked softly, as if afraid of frightening him, "Is your master's coffin still around?" Hunter felt like he had forgotten what fear was. Faced with such a gentle voice, he could only respond by instinct. "Yes, sir." Gorsa nodded. "Then I'll trouble you to send him back." "Yes, sir." The next second, Gorsa vanished once again. Hunter numbly stepped forward. He cradled his former master's head and two legs in his arms and silently placed them back into the carriage. "Master, let's go home." Gorsa had sent the visitor off with ease. In the next moment, he was back in the living room. He collapsed onto the sofa, leaned back, and let out a comfortable sigh, as if he'd just done some intense workout. Kaz, meanwhile, had returned to his original spot, the moment Ralph was reduced to 3 small pieces. Kaz, what do you think? Haven't forgotten all my light attribute spells yet, have I?" Kaz bowed his head respectfully. "No matter what attribute you major in, sir, you're always that powerful." Gorsa nodded in satisfaction. "But why did you let Ralph go?" Kaz couldn't understand. "If you're killing someone, why hold back?" "I let him go back to his coffin. He won't be able to recover for at least 4 or 5 years." Gorsa's explanation was weak, but Kaz had no choice but to nod. He didn't understand at all. Could it be that the Tower Master spared him because of the Bloodthorn family's old ties to the Bloodrose family? But that had been a long time ago, hadn't it? Then he heard the Tower Master say, "Right, 3 years from now, give Saul the Bloodthorn family's location. Have him pay them a visit. But he made the mess. He can clean it up. If he can't become a second-rank apprentice within 3 years, let him die out there." "Understood. Should I head back now?" Gorsa nodded, then leaned silently against the sofa. At that moment, he looked like a cloak, spread flat across the couch. Kaz left the living room and gently closed the door behind him. Then the corner of his mouth twitched. Does the Tower Master want Saul to visit the Bloodthorn family as training, or to expose him to body modification? Does he really intend for Saul to take part in our experiments? How many more years is that going to take? Kaz shook his head and left with his hands behind his back. Butler Hunter had excellent driving skills. Even at high speed, his master's round, rolling head remained firmly nestled on the seat cushion. As they passed through towns, the old butler didn't stop to rest. He kept the carriage racing forward, as if even a moment's delay would have him share his master's fate. Not until stars dotted the sky overhead did the carriage finally stop in a mountain hollow. The muscles on the old butler's face twitched, and suddenly he seemed to come alive again. He scrambled into the carriage, crawling on hands and knees. "Master, master!" He lifted Ralph's head and poured a pre-prepared flask of blood over it. The blood streamed down Ralph's face and into his mouth, as though guided by some invisible force. Ralph's gray, unblinking eyes suddenly moved. Then his mouth twitched slightly back to life. "Meat, I need meat," Ralph cried out weakly. The old butler quickly passed Ralph his legs. Ralph didn't mind that they were his own limbs. From his charred black neck, red flesh shot out to wrap around the legs. Then came the sound of chewing. Not enough, not enough. Ralph's neck was eating while his mouth kept moving too. Without hesitation, the butler drew a long blade from under the carriage seat and chopped off his own left arm with one swift stroke. Gritting his teeth through the pain, he held the severed limb out under Ralph's neck. Ralph accepted it without a word and devoured the arm. Still not enough, almost there. The butler then sliced off his right leg at the hip, using the tip of the blade to toss it over beside Ralph. That was all he could take. He collapsed in the carriage, quietly gasping in pain. Just as he was wondering if he should let his master devour him whole, Ralph finally seemed satisfied. Or at least temporarily satisfied. A tongue several meters long slithered from Ralph's mouth and licked the butler's arm and leg stumps. The wounds instantly closed up, though no new limbs grew back. "Back to the manor. I need a few years to recover," Ralph muttered, his neck a little longer now, and lay his head tiredly on the cushion. "Yes, master." The butler propped himself up with one arm, hooked a foot around the carriage frame to stabilize himself, and resumed the journey. If any traveler had seen the butler driving the carriage that night, they'd have been scared half to death. From inside came Ralph's cursing. "Gorsa, that lunatic, that butcher, that tyrant, I curse you to be betrayed by all, to be devoured alive." Even so, Ralph kept his voice low, afraid his words might leak out. Hunter knew his master was truly afraid this time. After venting for a while, Ralph told Hunter, "It'll take 4 or 5 years for me to recover. Be careful in the meantime. Don't let anyone know I'm still alive." "Understood, master," the butler answered promptly. Only then did Ralph close his eyes to rest. His butler had never once disappointed him. "Just wait, wait until I recover. Wait until I retrieve the diary. I won't let them off." Neither Gorsa nor Kez kept a constant watch on Saul's progress. They seemed absolutely certain that Saul would become a second-rank apprentice within 3 years. And Saul, completely unaware of this expectation, managed, through sheer persistence, to raise his magic power to 45 joules after 2 years. He had also finished analyzing the construction framework for a first-rank spell. He could advance at any moment. But Senior Byron advised him to hold off until he reached 50 joules before starting first-rank spells. Saul decided to trust the advice of someone more experienced and kept holding back, refraining from practicing first-rank magic just yet. Raising his magic power from 14 to 45 joules hadn't been as smooth as Saul had imagined. In fact, looking back, the process was full of bitter, tearful memories. His progress often hit inexplicable plateaus, where further meditation failed to increase his power. He asked around. Others had similar experiences, but rarely as frequently or severely as him. To make matters worse, Kelly never got stuck at all. She had already advanced to second rank 3 months ago. That day, she ran excitedly to Saul to show off, and kindly informed him that she had taken one of 2 adjacent rooms on the 12th floor, waiting for him to advance so they could be neighbors again. Even though he hadn't advanced yet, Saul had made a lot of valuable progress over the past 2 years. With little Algie's help and the safety net of the diary, he had successfully optimized the plastic bone formula, updated his left hand, and used the improved version to rebuild his right hand as well. Yes, once he confirmed the design wouldn't impact dexterity, Saul didn't hesitate to melt down his right hand too. Now both his hands were pale gray, smooth and delicate, slightly translucent, with visible bones inside. And his sculpting and molding skills had improved significantly. The new hands looked like plaster casts from an art studio, even a bit elegant. These hands not only gave Saul two big boosts in magic power, but after infusing them with soul fragments, they unlocked a new ability, spirit resin control. This allowed Saul to cast zero-tier dark attribute spells almost without adjusting his mental focus. Casting them became as easy and natural as waving his hand. Not only that, this time, Saul specifically found a way to solve the hand's vulnerability to electricity. He drew a set of symmetrical, interactive rune formations on the bones to resist electric fields. Now, with a pair of insulated gloves over them, he was basically shockproof. Chapter 93, Birthday Gift. Saul picked up a pair of long black gloves from the morgue's work table. These gloves were custom-made, snug against the skin, and extremely thin, so much so that they didn't create a noticeable barrier when handling objects. They were also dirt and water-resistant and not easily flammable, well worth the custom price. Most importantly, they didn't interfere with spellcasting. The only downside, they were a pain to put on. That's just how it is with these super form-fitting gloves. Saul started with his left hand. The interior was stiff and tacky, making it difficult to pull on smoothly. Just then, a thin black tendril extended from behind Saul's neck, deftly helping tug open the edge of the glove and assist in getting it on properly. Thanks, little Algie. This eerie-looking tentacle was actually a piece of the soul-devouring mire that Saul had inadvertently brought back from the abandoned lab beneath the Witch Tower's garden. After several rounds of examination and research, Saul had mostly confirmed that this little tendril wasn't particularly dangerous, especially since it could be yanked clean off his neck with a little force, making a soft pop, without leaving a single wound. Clearly, it wasn't parasitic. Once the glove was on, little Algie obediently retracted. Saul had named the tentacle Little Algie because it didn't resemble the massive, aggressive black tendrils from the swamp. Instead, it was more like that cluster of core consciousness from the soul-devouring mire. That core had looked like a clump of seaweed, so Saul had simply called it Little Algie for short. Little Algie was sometimes adorably dumb, sometimes clever as could be. It always stuck close to Saul and never showed itself around outsiders. Neither mentors nor senior apprentices had noticed anything unusual, or if they had, they just assumed it was some kind of specimen Saul carried around. No one ever questioned it. The morgue environment was somewhat similar to Little Algie's old home, and in the past few days, it had even plumped up a bit. With the gloves and the runes carved into his bones, Saul could finally attend class without having to constantly dodge stray electrical surges from Monica. Just as he finished putting everything away, a rhythmic knocking, bang, 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 sounded at the door. Before Saul could even move, Kelly's voice came from outside. Open up, birthday time." Her tone was flat, like she was announcing a water meter check. When Saul opened the door, there she stood, holding a square box in both hands. "Happy birthday." The box looked suspiciously familiar. Saul glanced back and saw an identical row of little boxes lined up on his workbench. Turning back with a complicated expression, he reached for the box and invited Kelly inside. People in this world didn't really celebrate birthdays, at least, not apprentice witches. Saul had once casually given Kelly a homemade, unnamed reagent number 1, on the day he'd found out was her birthday. He'd developed many such reagents during his exploration into body modifications, most of which were useless or even harmful. But reagent number 1 could remove certain impurities from metal, making it stronger. Figuring it might be useful for a metal-focused witch like Kelly, he'd handed it over as a casual gift. To his surprise, the small gesture had touched her deeply. She had never received a gift that was purely to celebrate her own existence. She asked for Saul's birthday after that, and had made it a point to celebrate it every year since. Last year, she had given him the rune for electrical resistance etched into his hand bones, a seriously valuable gift. "Is this one expensive?" Saul asked offhandedly as he set the box on the table and began unwrapping it. "How could a gift from me not be expensive?" Kelly crossed her arms, clearly waiting to see his reaction. Saul finally managed to peel open the meticulously wrapped box. Inside, nestled in cotton cloth, was a thumb-sized blue fruit. "This is," Saul blinked, trying to place it. Then it clicked. "This is a fruit from the companion flower." "Yup," Kelly nodded firmly. "And the kind that increases magic." Magic had always been a pain point for Saul. Especially after hitting 45 joules, his magic growth had hit a wall again. One of these blue fruits could boost his mana by at least 1 joule. Unfortunately, growing such fruit was unpredictable, and companion flowers themselves weren't easy to come by for apprentices. The first one Saul had gotten had miraculously borne a blue fruit. Later, through work and trades, he'd acquired 2 more, but they had never yielded white fruit. "These past 2 years, your birthday gifts have been right on time. Looks like I'll need to step up my game next year." Kelly nodded seriously. She never pulled her punches when it came to gifts. "If you've got any on hand, I could use some toxic compounds with unusual properties." "Toxins, aren't you focused on metal?" Saul blinked. This was the first time he'd heard of her needing poisons. "My mentor specializes in toxins. A lot of the projects and specimens he studies involve poison reactions." Kelly shrugged. Looked like becoming a second-rank apprentice came with the right to join in on a mentor's research. Saul, on the other hand, only occasionally helped mentor Rum or Senior Nick with simple experiments, and spent the rest of his time working in the morgue. Not that others weren't jealous of his position. "Anyway, enough of that," Kelly waved it off. "I also made a birthday cake. Let's go eat it in the dorms." "No thanks, let's not. I promise it's better than last year." "No, I have an experiment tonight. I can't sleep in the washroom again." "It won't come to that." Kelly quickly slipped behind Saul and started pushing him toward the door. "The ingredients are all fresh this time." Saul didn't want to actually shove her, so he struggled to resist gently. Just then, "Sorry, I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but what's a birthday cake? Some kind of new poison?" Nick emerged from behind the morgue's heavy crimson doors, lifting a hand in greeting. With an outsider present, Kelly immediately released Saul and resumed her cold and aloof demeanor. "Ah, good afternoon, Senior Nick." Saul straightened his collar. "A birthday cake is a kind of food you eat to celebrate your birthday. Your hometown even has a gift-giving tradition for birthdays." Nick stepped forward, holding up a folded letter. "Perfect. Then consider this good news my gift to you." Saul took the letter from between Nick's fingers and unfolded it, eyes scanning the contents quickly. A smile slowly bloomed on his face. "It's from Senior Byron." At the mention of Byron, Kelly also glanced over curiously, though she politely kept her distance. Saul finished reading, and his expression turned from joy to disbelief. He looked up. "Senior Byron says he's inviting us to join him on a mission outside the tower. What does that mean?" Nick answered calmly, "Exactly what it sounds like. As long as the mentors approve, a third-rank apprentice can invite even a first-rank one on external missions, and the mentors have never said no." He raised his hands and clapped twice. "Congratulations, you're getting out of here." Chapter 94. Leaving the Wizard Tower means becoming human again, temporarily. So I can leave the tower now. Saul felt as if he'd been released from prison. He was like a balloon floating into the sky, both weightless and untethered. He had thought he'd only get a chance to leave once he advanced to second rank. If he wanted to raise his magic to 50 joules, it would likely take him another half a year. Who would have thought that a single invitation from Senior Byron would push that timeline up? What kind of mission did Byron need his help with? Saul recalled that he'd asked Byron to help him search for a more complete soul entity. Maybe this invitation had something to do with that. "You're leaving the tower," Kelly's voice sounded beside him. "Yeah," Saul replied, smiling. "Ah, that's great. I just so happen to be going out too." Kelly, already a second-rank apprentice, wasn't exactly a surprising candidate for out-of-tower missions. But this was also her first time heading out. Saul asked with concern, "Is it a dangerous task?" Kelly shook her head. Eyes lowered, her tone was flat. "Just picking up some materials cultivated outside the tower and stopping by home." She didn't seem to want to elaborate. Then she lifted her head and raised her voice a bit. "Since it's your birthday and you've gotten such great news, let's hurry back and eat some cake to celebrate." Kelly once again clamped onto Saul's shoulder. "Cake to celebrate a birthday? But isn't cake something you can eat any time? Or is this not the kind of cake I'm thinking of?" Nick interjected curiously from the side. Since Nick would be accompanying Saul on the trip, Kelly thought for a moment and extended an invitation. "Please join us. I just finished baking it," she said with a nod. "It's a very special kind of cake." Saul perked up immediately. He didn't even need Kelly to push him this time and enthusiastically led Nick out. "Senior, don't be shy. I'll share my piece with you." Their departure was delayed by a day due to some unavoidable circumstances. By the time Nick took Saul and left the Wizard Tower in a carriage, he still looked a bit sluggish. Meanwhile, Saul, who had fed most of the birthday cake to Nick, was wide awake, leaning against the window to gaze outside. They were traveling in a two-tiered carriage. The space was cramped. There wasn't enough room to lie down, only lean back, but it was very fast. The driver was a grown male servant from the tower. Anyone who lived to that age likely had their own means of self-preservation. Throughout the journey, the servant spoke only when necessary and kept his presence to a minimum. Both Saul and Nick simply referred to him as the driver. They didn't even know his name. Saul could sense the fear radiating from the man. The same kind of fear he himself felt in front of mentors and the Tower Lord. It was a kind of pressure born from a disparity in power. No amount of courage could erase it. Nick remained reclined in his seat, resting. With no one to share in his joy, Saul could only hang halfway out the window like a first-time city tourist. It was April. The air still had a chill, but the spring breeze had already begun to green the earth. The once dull yellow grass surrounding the tower and the distant plains now showed tinges of fresh green. As the carriage sped along, grass seeds and insects splattered against the wheels and sides, leaving yellow-green smears. Mountains and forests drew closer. Wild hares and field mice occasionally darted out of the underbrush. After taking in the scenery for a while, Saul couldn't help but look back toward the tower. The gray-black Wizard Tower stood alone on the plain, surrounded by emptiness and silence, as if it had endured for centuries unchanged. Beyond the wizard structures, there wasn't a single tall shrub nearby. It was as if even the plants feared the tower, instinctively keeping their distance from that mysterious world. The carriage rumbled on across the vast wilderness for most of the day before reaching signs of human settlement. But they didn't stop, not even veering toward the towns. They sped past along the main road. These villages weren't exactly flourishing, though they had plenty of buildings. Saul noticed that when some people outside saw their carriage, they dropped to their knees and remained prostrate for a long time. They wore plain and worn clothes, but no one looked destitute. It seemed like life outside wasn't so bad. The darkness of the tower hadn't spread to the common folk. In fact, they appeared to benefit from the tower's environmental protections. After a long while, Saul finally withdrew from the window. Having stared at the landscape for so long, he still felt a sense of detachment, as though he were merely a bystander. It wasn't the carefree feeling he'd imagined. It was as if the chains from the tower were still wrapped tightly around his neck. When Saul sat back down in the carriage, feeling somewhat lost, he noticed that Nick had somehow fully recovered and was now reading a book. "So, fine." He rummaged through his heavy backpack, pushed aside his tools and potions, and picked out a book that wasn't too sensitive to read. They traveled for 5 days, only stopping briefly at night to rest. Even sleep was replaced by meditation. It felt a bit like being a monk. On the 6th day, Saul finally looked up from his constantly jostling book, closing his eyes to pinch the bridge of his nose. "Nick, do you know where we're actually headed?" "To Borderfall City on the edge of the Kema Duchy. We'll meet Byron there, then most likely head to Hanging Hands Valley. But before that, I need to take a quick detour to finish a minor task and earn some credits." Nick glanced up and winked at Saul. "Since we're already out and we've got time to spare, we shouldn't waste the trip." As they chatted, the carriage suddenly lurched to a stop, jolting both of them. "Are we there?" Saul quickly looked out the window, but saw only farmlands and gently rolling hills. There were no towns nearby. At the base of a hill in the distance, a group of several dozen riders stood quietly. One of them held a banner, blue with silver trim, emblazoned with an abstract image of a rabbit biting a snake. Nick closed his book without warning and slipped out of the carriage. From the opposing group, a tall, middle-aged man urged his horse forward. He wore a mix of navy blue and silver armor, light and flexible, with metal plating only at the vital points. A longsword hung at his hip. As he approached, he dismounted about 10 meters from Nick and dropped to one knee, offering a salute with one hand to his chest. Nick lifted his hand to signal him to rise, his gesture smooth and princely. The two turned their backs to Saul and began speaking in hushed tones. From this distance, Saul couldn't hear what they were saying. He could only tell that the man remained respectfully deferential while Nick stayed stoic as always. After a while, Nick returned, but didn't get back into the carriage. "There's a matter with my family that I need to attend to. From here to Borderfall City, you'll have to go on alone." Saul asked in surprise, "What about the mission with Byron?" Nick winked and his lips twitched ever so slightly. "I'll finish up my business quickly and catch up before the mission starts, but—" Saul immediately sensed something ominous in that "but." "Sure enough," Nick went on, "that small task I mentioned earlier, I'll have to trouble you to handle it. I'll transfer the mission credits to you." Chapter 95, A Familiar Face. Nick pulled a letter from the inner pocket of his coat and handed it to Saul. "This is a letter from Mentor Rum for Grindsail Town. I need you to take a small detour and deliver it. The coachman knows the way." Saul took the letter and noticed that it wasn't sealed. It could be read at any time. "Is there anything sensitive in here? Can I read it?" "Of course. It's written for ordinary folks. Grindsail Town barely has 2 first-rank apprentices, and they're pretty pathetic. You could take them out with one hand if you were serious," Nick reassured him. Grindsail Town is located on the border of the Kema Duchy, right next to a disputed area bordering the Keena's Duchy. The situation's a little complicated, but every year they send a local specialty, the grinding sound fruit, to the tower. In return, the tower offers them some protection. Nick gestured for Saul to open the letter and take a look. Saul unfolded it and saw line after line of elegant cursive. In his mind, he instantly pictured Mentor Rum's long, 3-jointed arms. The letter's message was simple. It reprimanded Grindsail Town for the recent decline in both the quantity and quality of their tribute. If this continued, the Galza Wizard Tower would withdraw its protection. "Do I need to go collect the tribute?" Saul asked, unsure whether his 14-year-old appearance could carry enough weight. "No need for that. A third-rank senior goes every summer to collect it. After all, the stuff still has some experimental value, Nick said, then leaned in slightly, lowering his voice despite knowing no one dared to eavesdrop. There are two ways to go about this mission. First, just head there, scold them on Mentor Rum's behalf, then enjoy yourself a bit, take what you want. Or you could dig around and figure out why their grinding sound fruits productions dropped. Then show up, take what you want, and report your findings back to Mentor Rum. No need to punish them yourself. But if they show you any disrespect, just remember, you represent the Wizard Tower. You'll know what to do. With that, Nick handed the task off to Saul and departed with his team. Saul stayed behind with the coachman and resumed the journey along the original path. Grindsail Town wasn't far from where they had split off. Saul traveled for just one day and arrived at the town's eastern outskirts before nightfall. The mission Nick gave him had 2 completion routes, and correspondingly, 2 different rewards. Saul wasn't exactly a detective, but he did have his eye on the second reward, so he decided to try the investigation route first. He told the coachman to wait outside the town and cast a minor illusion spell, changing his clothes. Now he looked like a ragged vagabond from the wilds. His hands were no longer black, but a normal flesh tone. Before he left, the coachman silently handed him a small pouch of coins. Inside were a dozen silver coins and a few scattered coppers. The coins bore intricate engravings, far too refined for the local tech level, likely crafted with some arcane assistance. Saul kept a few coppers on him and tucked the rest into his coat. He didn't yet know the local purchasing power and didn't want to blow his cover by flashing too much cash. After parting with the coachman, Saul picked up a stick from the roadside to use as a walking cane, trying to embody the role of a wandering beggar even more. There weren't many people outside Grindsail Town. Saul mimicked the expressions and gait of the passers-by, slowly approaching the nearby town. From the outside, Grindsail Town looked rather large. There was a surrounding wall, weathered and battered by wind and sand, making it look old and worn. Outside the wall were several rows of rundown houses, their appearance a clear sign of poverty. A small patch of farmland was under cultivation just beyond the town, though it wasn't very large. As Saul passed by the fields, he saw a dark-skinned young man turning over the soil with a hoe. When the boy reached the end of a furrow, he straightened up and wiped the sweat from his brow with a sleeve only to make direct eye contact with Saul. Saul saw his face and figured he was probably still in his teens. Saul turned away indifferently, gripping his stick and preparing to leave. "Saul," the voice behind him called out uncertainly. Saul stopped and turned, puzzled. Someone had called his name. When Saul looked back, he saw the young man already running toward him, hoe in hand. His face lit up with excitement. "Saul, it really is you. When we didn't see you after that charge from the village, I thought you got killed by barbarians." "And you are?" Saul asked with a confused look, though he was already guessing this was someone from the original Saul's past. "It's me, Ada. Haha, crazy how much I've changed, huh? You haven't changed at all, still skinny like a monkey. But seriously, how'd you get out of the village? I really thought you were dead. I cried for days, you know." Ada slapped Saul on the shoulder without hesitation, beaming. But seeing Saul still looking confused, his smile faded a little. "You don't remember me. I lived right next door. You were 10 back then, said you were gonna marry my little sister when she grew up. Then I beat you up for it, remember now." "I really don't remember," Saul said through gritted teeth. That was the original Saul's business, not his. Normally, he wouldn't bother with this sort of thing and would just walk away. But he thought of the town up ahead, and his tone shifted, warm, with a hint of probing. "Ada, do you live in Grindsail Town?" Noticing Saul's look, Ada hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, my sister and I live there now, just rent a small yard. Life been tough." Saul lit up. That's perfect. Ada, I was just looking for a place to stay in Grindsail Town. But I've been wandering a long time and don't have much money. Could I crash with you for a few days? I swear I'll move out once I find work. The sudden, blunt request left the honest young man unable to say no. Well, we don't really have space. Ada gripped the hoe tighter and tighter until it looked like he was about to drill it into the ground. Saul drew a sharp breath, rubbing his flat stomach and putting on a pitiful face. I can sleep on the floor. I haven't eaten in days. I heard Grindsail Town's a good place, so I rushed here for days. If I can't stay in town, I might just die out in the wild. He looked up, his eyebrows and mouth scrunched together miserably. Please, Ada, for old time's sake. Ada glanced at Saul's dirt-covered clothes, gaunt face, and pale lips. His expression turned complicated, as if he remembered something. All right, but I can only offer a place to sleep. As for food, we've only got green flatbread. You'll need to find work in town as soon as possible. Yes, of course, Saul agreed immediately, breaking into a bright smile. Ada looked at the fields, then at the setting sun. Forget it, I'll call it a day. He went to grab a wooden basket hidden beside the furrows, then returned. Come on, Sai. Ada walked ahead, sighing heavily. Saul, feeling no guilt at all for taking advantage of an honest man, followed cheerfully, looking around as they headed toward the town. Other farmers were also out in the fields. Some greeted Ada, others just glanced over disinterestedly and kept working. Ada, your town is amazing. It's so much more peaceful than where I used to live, Saul said. Ada paused, then replied in a low voice, It's not as great as you think. Just keep your head down and work hard. Maybe one day you can build a house outside the town and find a wife. Chapter 96. A very harmonious little town. Don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong. Saul leaned in. Ada, is something going on in your town? You'll find out later. Ada didn't explain and kept his head down, hurrying along. Seeing that Ada didn't want to talk, Saul could only follow quietly for now. As they got closer, Saul noticed that one section of the town wall facing the main road had two gates. One large gate, reinforced with thick wooden stakes, stood half a meter taller than the wall itself. And a smaller gate, just over 2 meters tall, was narrow and cramped. By now the sky had grown even darker. The large gate was tightly shut, while the small one was left open. At the small gate stood a cloth-armored soldier, lazily leaning against the wall, cradling an iron-tipped wooden spear and yawning listlessly. Saul glanced around but saw no other guards. Ada, your town has so few guards. Isn't the border just nearby? Is this really safe? Ada lowered his voice. Our duchy, been at war with the Kina's duchy up north for years. One of the town's mages and most of the guards have been sent to the front lines. Huh? Saul's face twisted with worry. Then who's in charge of keeping the town safe? His voice seemed a little too loud, drawing a glance from the drowsy soldier. Ada quickly pulled Saul aside and gave the soldier a polite smile. The soldier didn't pay them much mind. He didn't even ask for the entrance toll Saul had expected and simply let them pass into the town. After walking a good distance, Ada finally led Saul to a quiet spot along the empty street and stopped. He frowned and looked at Saul. There are people working under the wizard in town. Be careful what you say from now on. Don't draw their attention. Sorry, Saul apologized earnestly. I've been through a lot out there. I just want to settle down in a safe place. I'm afraid that after all this, even this town won't be a place I can call home. He hung his head, looking dejected. Ada looked at Saul's downcast expression and couldn't bring himself to scold him any further. Wiping sweat from his short hair, he sighed. If you want to know anything, just ask me when we get back. Don't go asking around in the streets. Okay, Saul nodded quickly. But Saul had already made up his mind. He would start gathering information first thing tomorrow morning. After all, local rumors were a vital source of intel. Still, for the sake of this honest and kind Ada, he would try to be discreet and choose the right people to ask. From then on, Saul kept very quiet and behaved himself. Ada glanced back at him a few times, clearly pleased to see that he wasn't wandering off or poking around. Even though night was falling, the town streets were still bustling. The wealthier households had already lit their lamps. The poorer ones hurried to finish their work before nightfall. The adults, weary from a long day, began preparing for rest. The children, meanwhile, did everything they could to delay going home. Ada remained silent the whole way. When people greeted him, he simply nodded, quite different from the outgoing man outside town who had happily chatted with an old friend he hadn't seen in years. Only when they turned into a narrow alley did Ada finally relax his tense shoulders. The path here was rough and uneven, far worse than the town's main roads. Full of pits and bumps, it was hard to walk on. It must have rained recently. Low-lying areas had collected puddles of water, and they had to step on stones to avoid soaking their shoes. Saul followed Ada's lead, stepping carefully on the stones. But he landed a bit too heavily. His rock was unsteady and water splashed up, nearly hitting a passerby. The passerby dodged the splash, scolding, "Watch it." Then, recognizing Ada ahead, broke into a smile. "Oh, Ada, you're back." "Auntie Jenny," Ada greeted her with his signature honest smile. Auntie Jenny had a basket in her arms. She reached in and pulled out a bunch of bright red chili peppers. "These just finished drying. Take them home and eat them with your flatbread." She stuffed them into Ada's wooden bucket despite his protests. "They're not too spicy. Penny can handle it. She needs to train her taste buds anyway." She laughed heartily. Ada, too honest to argue, accepted the gift with a shy smile. Then Auntie Jenny turned her eyes to Saul, giving him a once-over with a curious grin. "Here visiting family." Saul gave a toothy grin but didn't respond. Ada quickly stepped in. "He's from my hometown. Couldn't make it out there anymore, so he came to stay with me." Auntie Jenny's gaze became even bolder. "New to town, huh? Nice-looking lad, just a bit skinny. Make sure you do plenty of work. Work makes you strong." Yep, Ada answered for him, then hurriedly dragged Saul along. They continued down the path, and soon ran into a burly man with a thick beard, dragging along a skinny old man. Though it was early spring and still chilly, the burly man was barely dressed. His shirt was open at the collar, revealing broad chest muscles. A curved blade hung at his waist, swinging and slapping against his thigh with every step. "Captain Jeff." This time, Ada greeted him warmly, bringing the old lunatic back again. The towering Captain Jeff handed the old man over. Ada quickly passed his hoe and bucket to Saul and stepped up to help the old man. That old loon went to the mayor again, ranting about his tragic past. If I hadn't stopped him, he'd have been beaten up today. Jeff shook out his wrist, clearly sore from carrying the man. As if on cue, the old man suddenly shouted, "Cursed barbarians!" Everyone was used to his sudden outbursts. Only Saul turned to glance at him, sensing that though the old man's eyes were hollow, they weren't chaotic. He didn't look insane, just like a man who'd lost all hope in life. "I'll take him back," Ada offered. "Captain Jeff want to come in for a drink." Jeff waved him off and turned to leave. "No need, I've still got patrol duty." Ada smiled warmly, watching Jeff's back disappear down the path. Then the old man wailed again, "Don't trade with the barbarians." His voice was haunting. Saul noticed that Jeff paused mid-step. His right hand instinctively moved to the curved blade at his waist. But he didn't look back, didn't say a word, just kept walking, hands still resting on the hilt. Ada, preoccupied with calming the shouting old man, didn't notice Jeff's reaction at all. "Forget it, Saul. Put the stuff down and give me a hand." The frail old man was too much for Ada to handle alone, so he asked the scrawny Saul for help. Saul dropped his stick, shifted the hoe and bucket to his right hand, and reached under the old man's arm with his left. With a quick lift, he hoisted him back up before he could fall. Ada noticed the weight on his arm lighten significantly. He looked at Saul with surprise. "You're pretty strong." Saul replied casually, "Just muscle I earned from scraping by." "Now I really believe you walked all the way here on your own." Together, Ada and Saul helped the old man into a small courtyard. Ada's house was tucked away in a narrow yard. Surrounded by other homes, the courtyard was crisscrossed with strings of hemp rope, from which hung underwear, clothes, shoes, blankets, wild greens, and all kinds of strange things. Through the scattered hanging items, they saw a man with his butt stuck out, leaning against a wooden window and peeking inside one of the rooms. Ada's face instantly twisted in rage. "Jace, you bastard, stay away from my sister." Chapter 97. The Cocoon of the Nightmare Butterfly. Ada let go of the old madman and rushed forward. The man called Jace turned back and said nonchalantly, "What are you so worked up about? I was just checking on how Penny's doing." "Penny's none of your business." Ada lunged forward, grabbed Jace by the collar, and yanked him close. His other fist hovered in the air, seemingly ready to strike at any second. Jace didn't flinch or get angry. He simply grinned and said, "You're out all the time, and you keep Penny locked in at home every day. I was just trying to cheer her up a bit so she doesn't get too bored alone." This time, Ada really did want to swing his fist. But he couldn't beat Jace. Saul, still supporting the old madman, saw everything clearly from the side. That Jace was disheveled. His hair and beard were tangled together, but his exposed arms were densely muscled. And they were covered in scars, clearly the marks of someone who had lived a life licking blades. Ada, while fairly sturdy himself, looked smaller and more fragile standing next to Jace. That was probably why, despite all the bluster, he didn't dare to actually throw the punch. Thankfully, when Jace saw Ada's reddened eyes, he chuckled awkwardly and swatted away Ada's hand. All right, I'm going. That good enough for you?" He left the fuming Ada where he stood, casually straightening his collar as he passed by Saul and the old madman. He glanced at Saul's ragged appearance and rolled his eyes. Big-hearted Ada, bringing home strays again. Saul watched Jace leave the courtyard, then turn back. At this point, Ada was crouched by a window in the same pose Jace had used, talking to someone inside. A moment later, he turned around, looking a bit glum, and saw Saul still standing at the courtyard gate with the old madman. Ada directed Saul to drag the old man into the room closest to the gate, while he returned to unlock the door and slip inside. Saul hauled the old madman into the room and found it dimly lit. The room had no furniture, with belongings strewn about in a mess. Saul looked around and laid the old man on a straw-stuffed mattress. The old man had stopped resisting by now. He muttered a few words, barbarians, evil spirits, then rolled over and started snoring. Saul stood there for a moment and asked softly, "There are barbarians here too?" The old man's only reply was deafening snores. Saul was convinced the old madman wasn't as crazy as he seemed, and it looked like Captain Jeff had noticed something too. If the term barbarian hadn't also come from Senior Nick, Saul probably wouldn't have paid this man any mind. Saul glanced at the gate. The courtyard was empty. Ada had gone back to his room to deliver something. A slender black tendril extended from the back of Saul's neck and gently tapped the old madman's back. It slid up along his spine and lightly touched his neck. The old man seemed truly asleep, his snoring steady, his breathing even. Little Algie returned to Saul's side and lightly waved the tip of its tendril. That meant it didn't detect any evil spirits or lingering souls. Little Algie was more sensitive to spiritual entities than Saul. While Saul needed to enter a semi-meditative state to see obvious spiritual forms, little Algie could instinctively sniff out even the tiniest soul fragment as if it were food. It seemed the old man wasn't showing any signs of abnormality for now. Saul had little Algie retract itself and stepped out of the room. When he walked into the courtyard and looked up, he saw that one of the windows in Ada's room was haphazardly boarded up with wooden planks. Through a crack between the planks, a pair of silver eyes were staring straight at him, unblinking. Saul met the eyes for a moment. They were so cold and clear, like a spring in the woods. But if you reached into that spring, you'd find it bottomless. Saul, get in here. If you stand around too long, people'll think you're about to steal something. Ada had come out by now, stripped of his sweat-soaked shirt, and called Saul over. All right, Saul replied. When he looked back at the window, the silver eyes were gone. He stepped toward the house, feeling a faint sense of anticipation in his chest. The room was simple, just like Saul's dorm, no partitions. A wooden bed frame was set against the wall, both ends sealed up tight. At the head of the bed was a cabinet, its doors and side panels riddled with thumb-sized holes. Clearly intentional. As Saul looked, one of the holes suddenly revealed a silver eye. Then the eye shifted and was replaced by a pair of cracked, dry lips. Ada laid some dry grass over the room's only small wooden table, then shook out a tattered piece of clothing and spread it on top. It's getting dark. You'll sleep here tonight. Try not to wander around after sunset. Oh, right. Ada turned toward the cabinet and called, Penny, come on out. Come say hi to a big brother. You remember him, right? He used to be our neighbor. Creak. With an ear-piercing sound, a little girl crawled out of the cabinet on the bed like a kitten. She clumsily scooted to the edge of the bed, raised her head toward Ada, and revealed a pair of silver, nebula-like eyes. This is Penny. Last time you saw her, she was only 3. Pretty, right? She's growing up nicely. Penny wasn't exactly pretty. Her skin was sallow, her cheeks sunken, and her hair dry and straw-like. But her silver eyes were truly beautiful, so beautiful it made you want to fall into them. As Saul stared into those eyes, his diary suddenly flew out. April 11th, year 316 of the lunar calendar, clear. Lovely weather today. And lucky you to stumble upon the cocoon of a nightmare butterfly. Fancy spending your life entangled with nightmares. Then here's a tip, dig those eyes out, Tilda. Ada, still grinning foolishly, noticed how Saul was staring wide-eyed at Penny and suddenly scowled. Hey, Saul, you better not be thinking anything funny. Saul finally pulled his gaze away, meeting Ada's overprotective glare. What are you talking about? She's, what, 7? I was just curious about her eyes. She went blind. After we ran out of the village, I was carrying her the whole time. Didn't notice when she got hurt. By the time I found the wound, it was too late. It healed like that. Still, they look kind of nice now. Ada was clearly used to explaining this and sounded calm. He walked over and handed Penny some food. Penny refused it, pushing her brother's hand away and staring directly at Saul. Is she really blind? Saul walked over and waved his hand in front of her eyes. Penny stared straight at his face. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. Brother Saul, the little girl suddenly chirped. Hello, Penny. Saul bent down and smiled at her. Brother Saul, Penny called again. Ada suddenly yanked Saul back and cried exaggeratedly. No way, Penny, you remember him. Penny smiled shyly and retreated back into the cabinet. Ada ignored the oddness of her movements and grumbled. She only ever calls me Ada, never brother. But you show up and she's all sweet and polite. Seeing Saul shrug innocently, Ada repeated himself again, louder. No funny ideas about my sister. Chapter 98, Grinding Sound Fruit and the Wandering Apprentice. That night Saul slept in Ada's room. He took the table, Ada took the bed, and Penny slept in the cupboard. The three of them each had their own spot. Perhaps Saul and Penny's interactions earlier that evening had agitated Ada a bit. He went out of his way to dig up a piece of hemp rope and tied it between the table and the bed. He didn't even cover himself with a blanket, hanging it up like a curtain instead. But Saul wasn't asleep. When night fully cloaked the land and all was silent, he slowly opened his eyes. He lightly jumped down from the table and lifted Ada's tattered blanket. The person underneath was already sound asleep. At some point, Ada had rolled to the edge of the bed, one arm and one leg hanging off the side. Saul sat at the edge of the wooden bed and gently opened the cupboard above. This time the door made no sound. Silent portal, a simple zero-tier spell. Inside the cupboard, the young Penny was already asleep, and her sleeping posture was much more disciplined than her brother. Maybe it was because she'd spent years sleeping in a cupboard. But Saul observed her eyes closely and noticed her eyelids were twitching constantly and rather violently at that. A sign of dreaming. Penny's complexion didn't look good. Her brows were slightly furrowed, her lips tightly pressed, arms and legs curled inwards. She looked like she was sleeping with zero sense of security. Saul immediately entered a semi-immersive meditation state to examine Penny. But her body was clean, no anomalies that he could see, including her eyes. Saul reached out and gently touched Penny's eyes, then touched his own for comparison. He didn't feel any difference. If it weren't for what the diary had revealed, Saul would have simply thought her eyes were just pretty, nothing more. But anything noted in the diary had to be of considerable value. Should he take Penny's eyes? Saul had a way to safely extract them. After all, she couldn't see any more anyway. But in the end, he withdrew his hand and closed the cupboard door tightly. Just then, Ada rolled over again, shifting from the bed's edge back to the center. Saul jumped off the bed and quietly left. It was midnight. The full moon hung high, no clouds in sight. Under its glow, the town was faintly illuminated. For Saul, this level of light was more than enough. It was a new moon just yesterday. How is it suddenly full tonight? Saul stood on the empty main street, looking up at the sky. From the bits of memory I inherited, this really does seem to be the norm. Looks like the moon in this world isn't just some celestial object. Having spent all his time in the Wizard Tower, this was Saul's first time noticing something odd about the moon. But now wasn't the time to be gazing at it. Before coming to Grindsail Town, Saul had made sure to learn a thing or two about the grinding sound fruit. He hadn't brought many books with him, and unfortunately, the botany volume of basic knowledge of all things wasn't among them. Luckily, among the books Nick left in the carriage, there was one that covered the grinding sound fruit. It was a vine-like plant, its fruit hanging down like a gourd. Shaped like a recorder, it would emit grinding wheel-like sounds when wind passed through it. The sound wasn't exactly unpleasant, but it certainly wasn't friendly to ordinary people. It could cause irritation, dizziness, nausea, and even make someone pass out if exposed for too long. Yet it was a valuable material for wizardry but hard to cultivate, even harder to transplant. That was exactly why the Wizard Tower had accepted Grindsail Town's allegiance, even though it lay beyond the tower's usual sphere of influence. According to Nick's book, the grinding sound fruit's true value lay in its calming properties. It could pacify agitated individuals and even worked on spiritual entities. Like a tranquilizer. Since it was a fruit that had to be offered to the tower, there was no way it would be casually grown in the wild. It had to be carefully cultivated and constantly guarded. But due to the way the fruit reacted to wind, it couldn't be planted in open, windy areas. Ordinary people simply couldn't watch over them properly, and one misstep could ruin the entire batch. Saul climbed the tallest nearby building and stood atop the chimney, scanning all of Grindsail Town. At this hour, the town was unnaturally quiet, almost no lights anywhere, which only made the handful of light sources at the northern edge of town stand out all the more. Target locked, Saul rappelled down the roof using a strand of algae vine and darted toward the source of the light. Reaching the town's northern edge, Saul realized the light came from beyond the town walls. He easily climbed over the completely unguarded barrier and headed outside. A few hundred meters beyond the wall stood a row of brick buildings. They were arranged in a ring, surrounding an open space that was enclosed by a 3-meter-high wall, topped with a wooden roof. There was no wind tonight. So many of the wooden panels were pushed aside, revealing dark green vines and foliage inside. The vines weren't densely packed. Through the wide leaves, Saul could glimpse the fruits hanging down. Behind the open field stood a 3-story tower. The tower was pitch black, every window boarded shut. It gave off a faint aura of foreboding. Saul dropped from the wall and carefully concealed himself as he approached. He remembered Nick mentioning that 2 first-rank apprentices were stationed here. Nick said their combat skills were trash, but that was from his perspective. Saul wasn't about to lower his guard. If they found out he came from the Wizard Tower, they'd definitely try to cover up the truth behind the fruit's dwindling yield, if there really was something fishy going on. Casting another spell of illusion upon himself, Saul weaved through the shadows and got close to the fenced-in field. Fires lit the area. Guards were posted every few meters. There were more guards here than at the town's gates or even on patrol. Finding an opening, Saul climbed onto the roof of a nearby building. From this vantage, he could clearly see the plants inside the field. They matched Nick's descriptions well. Only, the recorder-shaped fruits were all wrapped in a layer of paper pulp, leaving only the tip where it connected to the stem exposed. So that's how they keep the fruit from making noise in the wind. But can the fruit grow well like this? A wall to block the wind, paper wrappings too, and this place doesn't even seem that rainy. Given all that, Saul figured it was only natural that the grinding sound fruit yields had dropped. But could there be other reasons? He swept his gaze around the area and spotted a house behind the row of buildings, guarded on all sides by soldiers. Visualizing the human-monster movement diagram, Saul cautiously observed his surroundings. No unusual spirits detected. Even the tower with boarded-up windows was clean. Just as expected, outside the Wizard Tower, clean was the norm. Relying on the ongoing effect of his illusion spell, Saul slipped in through a second-floor window of the guarded house. Inside, no lights, total dimness. He searched room after room but found no one. Eventually, he discovered a hidden underground passage in the kitchen on the first floor. Its entrance was cleverly concealed beneath a stove. While the disguise was decent, Saul still picked up on something odd. Most importantly, he sensed faint magical fluctuations coming from the passage. There was a wizard apprentice inside, casting a spell. Saul muttered to himself, "The magic leak on this guy is insane. Definitely someone who didn't receive formal training. A wandering wizard, no, a wandering apprentice." Now he fully believed Nick's evaluation. If the 2 stationed here were like this, Saul could take them out easily. Still, despite their weakness, Saul didn't rush in. Entrances to secret chambers like these usually had traps to prevent intruders. Saul wasn't confident he could avoid triggering one. He was here to eavesdrop, not assassinate. Chapter 99, For the Sake of the Town. Saul looked around and found an empty cupboard to hide in. There wasn't any grain, oil, or food inside. Clearly, it was just a decorative piece to throw people off. He curled up and sat inside. To avoid alerting those below with any fluctuations in his mental power, he didn't even meditate. He just passed the time by counting the cracks on the cabinet door. After about 2 or 3 hours, the hidden door behind the stove finally opened, and two people climbed out. Judging by the footsteps, there were two of them. They were still talking as they emerged. "I'll leave tomorrow's matter to you. Don't worry. As long as the goods are sufficient, the rest is minor. It's just that that person is coming back in a couple of days. Doesn't matter anymore." "Understood. Congratulations, sir." The footsteps gradually faded away, leaving Saul crouched in the cupboard completely confused. What were they talking about? Isn't eavesdropping supposed to conveniently provide key information? Why did he come away with nothing but confusion? But thinking it over, it wasn't a total loss. Something was clearly going to happen tomorrow. One party was handling an incident, the other was offering compensation, and apparently there was something worth congratulating. Saul waited a little longer. When no one came back, he slipped out of the cupboard. The two men must have gone far away, as there was no one outside the house either, not even the guards. He circled back to the clearing where the grinding sound fruit was grown, then turned around before dawn and rushed back to Ada's place. Ada, exhausted from a full day's work, was sleeping like a log and never even noticed that his houseguest had been out the entire night. The next morning, Ada got up early to light the fire and cook, calling Saul to help him. The meal was simple, just plain green buns and wild vegetables. The clay stove was right inside the house. Once the fire was lit, smoke swirled everywhere. They set aside a portion of food for Penny's lunch, then hurriedly headed out. To Saul's surprise, Ada turned down his request to walk around town and look for work. "I saw you've got some strength. Why not come with me to farm the mayor's land? There's little land around here, so it's a good job. Do it for a couple of years, and you'll be able to build a small house outside town." Saul immediately shook his head. "I'm not cut out for that." Ada asked, "Then what can you do? There's not much labor needed in town." Saul didn't say anything. He just wanted to explore town on his own. Ada assumed Saul just didn't want to do farm work and wasn't too pleased, but he didn't press it. He took Saul to the part of town where jobs were available. "I'm only taking you there. Whether you find work is up to you. I need to get back to tilling." But before they even reached the job market, they stumbled upon a commotion. They arrived at a relatively orderly street and saw a crowd gathered around a house. People were packed in layers, making Saul realize just how populated this town really was. There was wailing coming from inside the crowd. Ada, who wasn't planning to stick around, grew wary and tugged on Saul, urging him to leave quickly. But Saul felt this was more than just a regular commotion. Relying on his slim build and strength, he forced his way to the front. Ada tried to pull him back but quickly lost sight of him in the crowd. Unwilling to push through, he stood on his tiptoes, frowning with frustration. "If it weren't for that strength of yours," he muttered, unsure if he regretted taking Saul in. Meanwhile, Saul finally saw the cause of the stir. At the center of the crowd was a crying couple. An elderly man, with streaks of white in his hair, was gently trying to console them with a smile. The squad leader, Jeff, whom Saul had seen yesterday, stood opposite the couple, face expressionless, hand resting on the hilt of his curved blade. Behind Jeff, two soldiers were holding up a limp, barely standing girl. She looked 15 or 16, dressed in a blue plaid dress. Among the crowd of commoners, she stood out as quite pretty. Off to Saul's diagonal side, a figure in a black robe and hood stood stiffly with arms tucked into his sleeves. Around him was a wide clearing. No townsfolk dared stand close. "Si, how many times do I have to say this before you understand? This is for the town's survival, and it's not a bad thing," the old man consoled the crying couple. Saul looked at the couple collapsed in tears, then at the terrified girl, and simply couldn't imagine how this could be anything but bad. But the crowd clearly thought otherwise. A woman with a basket snapped, "What are you crying for? This is for the whole town. If I had a daughter, I'd happily send her off." Saul recognized her. It was Aunt Jenny, the woman who'd been so warm yesterday. The weeping woman lowered her hands from her face and cried out, "But Minnie is our only daughter." Someone immediately chimed in, "Then have another one. You'd risk the whole town for one girl." The crowd erupted in agreement, criticizing the couple for being selfish and heartless. The pressure was suffocating. Neither could say a word. The old man patted the husband's shoulder, smile deepening. "So you agree, yes. Good, good. I didn't want to force anyone, but only Minnie meets the wizard's requirements. It's her honor, our honor. The holy fruit is the town's lifeline. If the harvest keeps dropping and we anger the tower, none of us will survive." The old man's words were well crafted. The crowd once again turned on the couple. Could the life of one little girl really outweigh an entire town? The wife was too choked to speak, slumped on the ground, sobbing. The husband's knees gave out. Somehow mustering the strength, he grabbed the old man's hand and shouted, "But Mayor, over the years, we've already sacrificed so many girls, and the holy fruit harvest still hasn't improved. Maybe this method—" He didn't finish. The silent apprentice wizard gave a cold snort. That snort was devastating. Everyone, from the performers to the onlookers, instinctively clutched their ears. Two townspeople closest to him even started bleeding from their ears. Saul covered his ears like the rest, but after bowing his head, he rolled his eyes. What kind of weak scattercough spell was that? Can't even focus it with mental energy. The best performance came from Captain Jeff, who, despite his twisted expression, resisted the urge to cover his ears. The shock silenced the crowd. Even the couple dared not sob loudly. And just like that, the girl was taken away, leaving only a bag of money for the couple. Even after the commotion ended, the crowd lingered. Some offered consolation, saying at least they got some compensation. They wouldn't have to worry about survival for years. Aunt Jenny even stepped forward to congratulate them and offered advice on how to spend the money, like a seasoned veteran. As the crowd finally started to disperse, Ada found Saul hidden among them. Face dark, he dragged Saul aside. "You just had to watch the spectacle. If we hadn't been lucky and stood far from that man, your ears might have been injured too." Chapter 100. The Foster Mothers of the Soundgrain Fruit. Ada scolded Saul for his rash behavior, but he himself looked like the guilty one, rubbing his hands together nervously, his face pale, his eyes darting around uneasily. What exactly happened just now? Why was a wizard present? Saul asked curiously, undeterred by Ada's anxious expression. "I told you not to be so curious. Around here, curiosity isn't a good thing." But before Ada could continue, someone suddenly interrupted him. "If that skinny kid wants to settle in town, he better know a few things. Aren't you afraid he'll offend someone by accident and lose his little life?" Jace stepped out from under the eaves where he had apparently been standing the whole time, quietly watching the scene unfold. He gave Saul a sweeping glance and asked with a grin, "You got any sisters?" Saul shook his head, "Just me." "Oh, then no need to worry." Jace spread his hands. Grindsail Town has always survived thanks to the grinding sound fruit, but the fruit's hard to grow. It often suddenly drops in yield. To keep up the town's income, to maintain the protection of the wizard tower, our respected, great beloved wizard lords choose a sweet, innocent girl every few years to serve as a foster mother to the fruit. Foster mother, Saul repeated in disbelief. "Yeah, foster mother. They give their lives to feed a bunch of fruit. What else would you call that?" "How exactly do they foster it?" Jace's expression suddenly darkened, though it quickly returned to nonchalance. "Who knows? That's wizard business. How could small folks like us get a glimpse?" If his face hadn't turned so ugly just then, Saul might have believed him. Looks like being a foster mother is exactly a walk in the park. Does this happen every year? Wouldn't the town run out of girls? How would anyone keep having kids? Saul pressed. It used to be less frequent, every 3 or 4 years, but lately it's been more often. This year alone, she's already the third. Jace trailed off, lost in thought. Ada couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed Saul and started dragging him away. Why are you chatting with that guy? He's just a sleazy old loafer, doing nothing all day but harassing people. Stick with him and you'll turn rotten in no time, Ada grumbled. Ada, you know about this foster mother stuff too? Saul asked. It wasn't until they'd walked several dozen meters that Ada stopped and turned to Saul. Live here a few years and you'll find out eventually. You don't need to worry about this stuff. You can't do anything about it. That's just how it is. This town, we survive because of that sacred fruit. Do you know why the grinding sound fruit's yield is dropping? How would I know? That's something bigwigs worry about. You just focus on yourself. Thinking Saul just wanted to wander around town, Ada tried to drag him back to the fields. But halfway there, Saul slipped away, leaving Ada stomping mad before trudging off to finish his chores. But Saul didn't go far. He returned to the place that had drawn the crowd earlier. Most people had dispersed by now. Only a few with family ties or those who enjoyed gossip still lingered. Several folks were gathered around the sobbing couple, taking turns offering comfort. Their words were all about accepting fate, staying calm, saying that they'd have another child in time. As Saul approached, he spotted Aunt Jenny watching coldly from the edge of the group, no trace of that fake smile she wore earlier. She looked more like a statue in the middle of the street, only shaped like a person. Saul coughed lightly to get her attention. She turned, saw it was Saul, and her face lit up with a smile. It was like she came back to life. Aren't you the young man who came back with Ada yesterday? Why are you wandering the streets alone? She gave him a once-over. I just got to Grind Sale Town. Thought I'd look around and find some work, Saul replied casually, then asked, Aunt Jenny, what happened just now? Why did a wizard apprentice show up? Apprentice, my foot. You better call them wizard lords. She made a dramatic SHH gesture, though her voice was anything but quiet. Then she eagerly launched into the tale of the town's traditions. Grind Sale Town used to be a poor, tiny village, its population and land area not even a tenth of what it is now. Then one day, two passing wizards discovered wild grinding sound fruit growing nearby and decided to settle here. With their help, the yield of the grinding sound fruit greatly increased, turning it into the town's main source of income. Thanks to the fruit, Grind Sale Town became a vassal of a powerful wizarding organization from afar. They traded the fruit for materials and supplies, bringing the town prosperity. As the town grew, it was renamed Grind Sale Town. But being on the border had its problems. After tensions between the Kema and Kina's duchies flared up, the town's situation worsened. Most of their military force was sent to the frontier at Desert Edge City due to unrest near the fortress, leaving Grind Sale with little defense. Then came bands of wild barbarians, attacking from time to time. No one knew where they came from or where they hid. The result? The grinding sound fruit harvest dropped year after year, and soon they could barely meet their tribute quota. To boost production and keep the protection of the wizards, the town had to increase how often they offered pure young girls to nurture the fruit. But doesn't that wizard organization protect Grind Sale? Why don't they wipe out the barbarians? Saul had heard from Nick that third-rank apprentices came regularly to collect the ripe fruit. Shouldn't they be able to deal with a few barbarians while they're at it? After all, most barbarians were just stronger than average brutes, not much against a wizard. Well, Aunt Jenny faltered. I don't know. The barbarians mostly attack outlying villages. No one knows where they hide, maybe they're hard to catch. As she spoke, Her gaze shifted toward the couple being led back to their home. You just settle in here. As long as nothing happens to the grinding sound fruit, nothing will happen to the town, she said, pausing for emphasis. Then she turned back to Saul, all smiles again, and warmly invited him to her house. But there was something strange in her eyes. Saul, having heard enough, didn't hesitate to shake her off. "Thanks, Aunt Jenny. I'll keep looking for work. Don't have any money right now," he said with a cheeky grin before darting off. Aunt Jenny stared blankly for a moment, then cursed under her breath, though she didn't seem truly angry. Saul jogged down the street, taking in the shops and scenery around him. Though the town wasn't especially prosperous, everyone walking the streets seemed peaceful and content. Even the shabbily dressed old man sitting by the roadside could chat and laugh with the shopkeeper behind him about dinner plans. It felt like a town with no worries for the future, because they had the grinding sound fruit. After a full loop around town, Saul returned to Ada's courtyard around noon. A woman was carrying a wooden basin outside and jumped with fright when she saw Saul. She quickly turned back and scurried into the house, slamming the door behind her like Saul was some sort of monster. Saul glanced down at his hands. His magical disguise was still in place. What was she panicking about? Ignoring the frightened woman, Saul turned left and entered the old madman's room. The old man had been fast asleep since returning the night before, and Saul hadn't had time to check on him this morning due to Ada rushing him out. Now that he was back, Saul saw the room was empty. It was messier than before, as if someone had deliberately searched it. Some things were even missing. Saul rubbed his chin, ran off pretty fast,